Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution, and Putin once again has delivered advanced weapons to the African revolutionary nations. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, Putin continues to make sure the imperialists don't get their hands back on the assets of these revolutionary nations. I once already told y'all, as long as they fight, they want to fight, he's going to support them. This puts a thorn in the side of France, Britain, United States, and even Mossad trying to keep their empires going. Let's get right into this information.
The delivery reportedly included a number of tanks, trucks, artillery systems, and infantry fighting vehicles. Images on social media platforms showed that a convoy of over 100 vehicles arrived in Mali's capital of Bamako, reportedly from Syria, where Russian troops had departed following the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Local media reports indicate that half of the vehicles in the convoy were trucks, including armored Kamaz trucks and engineering vehicles. The convoy also included T-72 tanks, BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, as well as armored personnel carriers such as BTR-82, Spartak, Linza, and Tiger. Reports suggest that the convoy also included D-30 towed artillery pieces, anti-aircraft cannons, and a couple of boats. However, there was also a significant number of unidentified vehicles as they were covered during the transportation.
Yeah, you don't need to see everything, goddammit. Then you're going to be able to list it all for the imperialists to know. You see, they never gave, even the U.S. said they tried to help Africans. You never gave them no advanced weapons to defend themselves. Hell no, because then they kick your ass out. This is what the Africans need. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which now are getting more countries, which we're going to look into that, are siding with them. This revolution is growing in Africa. But I said this from the beginning, it's because Putin is checkmating the West. You want to strengthen Ukraine? I'm going to strengthen everybody you ever had a problem with. Russia said that. I'm going to strengthen Venezuela. I'm going to strengthen Cuba. I'm going to strengthen Iran. I'm going to strengthen North Korea. China going to be strengthened. All your African colonies, they definitely getting strengthened.
Now, Russia has been allegedly withdrawing large amounts of military hardware and troops from Syria, where rebels ousted Bashar al-Assad last year and established a new transitional administration. Russia has reportedly moved some of its military equipment to the northern African nation of Libya, where Moscow has recently reinforced runways and perimeter defenses at air bases. And Mali allegedly appears to be the next recipient of this equipment from Syria. Mali, along with its neighbors Burkina Faso and Niger, have in recent years grown extremely close to Russia, and this is especially true after the military came to power in 2021 in Mali and ousted the West African country's longtime ally, France. Since then, Mali has been courting Moscow for greater military support amid growing jihadist insurgency from Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, while turning its back on the West. In recent years, Moscow has supplied Bamako with ammunition, fighter aircraft, sensors, and combat helicopters, among others, to fight the rising threats from insurgents. Moreover, reports suggest that Russia, which has been forging new partnerships across Asia and Africa to counter its growing isolation, has also expanded a military base in the capital Bamako at a former site of the Africa Corps. Now, formerly called the Wagner Group, a private military contractor linked to the Kremlin. Additionally, Russian mercenaries, as part of Africa Corps, have also been fighting the jihadist insurgents side by side with the Malian armed forces since late 2021. And reports indicate that the recent Russian military hardware delivery to Mali might just be for the Africa Corps operating in the West African country, despite Mali claiming that it is destined for its armed forces. So as Russia ramps up its support for the Sahel countries, one will be watching out for whether it helps curb the growing insurgency in the region or not?
Yeah, we back. Yeah, we back. Now, today we got a special video. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the big homie. You already know His Excellency,
none
General
of
of
this
the
that
Army,
Mali is
Assimi
doing.
Goita, President of Mali. Now, if you've been following this channel, then you already know we've been covering a lot of the recent developments that's been happening under the administration of Assimi Goita. As you already know, take a look up on the screen. A couple months ago, Mali wins $160 million in gold mining dispute after detaining a British businessman. Last week, Mali is set for a huge $1.2 billion payday from mining businesses. A few days after that, Mali begins enforcing a gold seizure order at the Barrick site. A couple days after that, Barrick suspends operations in Mali after $245 million worth of gold was seized. A couple days after that, Mali is holding the seized gold from Barrick at the state-owned bank. Now, today we got some brand new recent developments to talk about. Take a look up on the screen. Assimi Goita announces a project for weapons assembly plants. Yeah, like I mentioned before, the more money you get, the more weapons you got to accumulate, the more guns you got to buy. So now we have gone from shaking down the multinational corporations in the mining sector. Now we are moving into domestic weapons manufacturing. Now, man, round of applause for the big homie one time. Round of applause for Assimi Goita, His Excellency, General of the Army. Man, now only my day one subscribers will know this. Those who've been with me since I had 13 subscribers. My first few videos on YouTube, now I deleted those videos long time ago, right? Like my real first, 10, 15 videos on YouTube, I deleted them because they were so amateur. But one of those videos was actually about Assimi Goita, right? Way back in the day, back in 2022, something like that, like years back, right? Way before Ibrahim Traore came to power, way before General C.I.A came to power. This was years before, way before the AES even existed, way before the Confederation, when it was only Assimi Goita standing by himself, right? At one time, it was only Assimi Goita standing by himself. He had nobody else but himself. He was standing alone, one-man army. And I remember because I was there, bro. I remember. I've been here from day one. When it comes to Assimi Goita, I've been here since day one. I remember when he had the assassination attempt at the mosque, right? They tried to run up on him and stab him to death at the mosque. I remember. Take a look up on the screen. This was back in 2021. The man accused of attempted assassination on the Mali president dies in custody. This was damn near 4 years ago almost. And now, on the heels of that story that I just covered about Ibrahim Traore receiving 60 million euros for the release of the French agents, now I'm thinking, man, that assassination attempt at the mosque was probably orchestrated by the DGSE. Let's jump into that article. A man accused of attempting to stab Mali's president, Assimi Goita, last week has died in the hospital while in custody of the security services, the government said in a statement on Sunday. Goita, a special forces colonel who orchestrated 2 coups in the last year, escaped unharmed after the assailant tried to stab him during prayers at a mosque in the capital of Bamako on Tuesday. Now, that was back in 2021, right? My man Goita done already, we talk about Ibrahim Traore, dodging the assassination attempts. My man Goita was dodging them assassination attempts way back in the day, way back then. And now we done come a long way. We done came such a long way, man. 2025, man. Now we shaking down the multinationals. Now we setting the building blocks and the foundations for a domestic weapons industry, weapons manufacturing. Man, let's jump into these articles, man. Take a look up on the screen. Assimi Goita announces a project for weapons assembly plants. Mali celebrates this Monday, January 20th, the 64th anniversary of the army. On this occasion, General Assimi Goita addressed the Malians this Sunday evening on the airwaves of state television. He mentioned the construction of a memorial for the soldiers who fell in the field of honor. In Kati, a garrison city near Bamako, Assimi Goita, above all, announced his desire to provide the country with construction plants, or rather arms assembly. It is at this stage a project of which the Malian president has revealed only a few details. Now, this website, RFI, this is the French state-owned media. So, obviously they're keeping, a close eye on the events. Assimi Goita talking about we manufacturing weapons. Oh, man, the DGSE going crazy right now, right? Guarantee. They're probably going to have an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Now, let's continue. On the occasion of the 64th anniversary of the Malian army, the president and the Army General, Assimi Goïta, spoke to make major announcements about the future of national defense. In his speech on Sunday evening, he revealed the imminent creation of a national military industry dedicated to the production of weapons. This ambitious initiative aims to strengthen the capabilities of the Malian army, with an emphasis on self-sufficiency in military equipment. The project will include the assembly of individual and collective weapons, the production of light tactical vehicles, as well as the manufacture of ammunition and explosives for civilian use. In order to strengthen the achievements of 2024 and ensure future success, the process of equipping the armed forces and security will be perfected in 2025 with the establishment of a military industry, explained Assimi Goïta, highlighting the ongoing efforts to establish an arms factory entirely dedicated to these objectives. Now, another reason why this story is significant is because over the past year or so, the Malian army has claimed some of the biggest victories in the fight against terrorism, period, point blank. The biggest one being the death of the Islamic State commander, Abu Huzaifa. Take a look up on the screen. Back in April 2024, Mali forces killed senior figure in Islamic State affiliate. Abu Huzaifa, known by the alias Higo, was a commander in the group known as Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. The United States State Department had announced a reward of up to $5 million for information about him. Huzaifa is believed to have carried out the 2017 assault on U.S. and Nigerian forces. 4 Americans and 4 Nigerian soldiers were killed. So one of the biggest, terrorists on the terrorist, bounty list was killed by the Malian army in the past year. One of the biggest victories in the fight against terrorism of recent date, right? And then, of course, the recent airstrike that killed 8 terrorist leaders in the north of the country back in December. Even the Western media had to admit that was the biggest victory in the fight against terrorism over the past decade, where so many leaders were killed in a single attack. And now, fresh into the new year, we got this news, right? A major windfall of cash coming in the first quarter of the year from the mining sector. And now we about to set
the biggest victories versus terrorism in over a decade. Well, guess what happened? They kicked the French and the U.S. and the Germans and the Spanish and the Portuguese. All of they kicked them out of their country. Then you could beat the terrorists. People have to ask themselves, why were they defeating any terrorists when the NATO superpowers were in their country? Why you kick them out? Russia steps in, trains you, give you these advanced weapons, then you start scoring big military victories. Come on, man.
At the building blocks and set the foundation for a domestic weapons industry in the defense sector. Now, once again, salute to the big homie Assimi Goïta. Now, I know Ibrahim Traoré, he's the guy.
Never forget, Ukraine started working with the terrorists in Mali. They killed a bunch of Russian soldiers and killed a bunch of Mali soldiers at the same time, working with the terrorists. So they pulled the mask off and showed the whole world. You damn right they're working with ISIS and working with terrorists in Africa.
He's the star, no doubt about it. But Assimi Goïta, you can't forget it. Not only was he the first, right? Not only was he the pioneer of the movement, but you cannot forget that when you talk about Assimi Goïta, you're talking about somebody that was special forces, front line fighting against the terrorists. Really been in the field, shooting it out, banging it out with the terrorists, right? So, we can't forget Assimi Goïta, he's not no regular black man. Now, let's continue. The Malian president also sent a strong message to those who oppose the country, both at home and abroad, recalling that Mali is no longer a fertile ground for nostalgia for a bygone past. Our nation is now a free and sovereign actor, forging its future with determination, he said, thus affirming Mali's desire to free itself from external influences and chart its own path. Now, I want to get into a clip where the general himself was giving a speech talking about these topics right here. So I'm going to run the footage and I'll be right back.
The process of equipping the armed and security forces will improve in 2025 with the establishment of a military industry. We are actively working on setting up armament zones with units for the assembly of individual and collective weapons, light tactical vehicle assembly, and the manufacture of ammunition and explosives at civilian IJAS. To honor the symbols of sacrifice of our fallen soldiers on the field of honor, tomorrow we will lay the first stone of the memorial dedicated to their memory. As part of its adaptation to new threats, the Malian army will focus on acquiring more sophisticated equipment by the year 2025. Our Military infrastructures, on their part, are being fully modernized. A new operational reorganization has been implemented with advanced bases that ensure better territorial coverage for a strengthened presence of the state in all territories, especially in our most exposed regions.
Now, in the AES right now, so in Burkina Faso, we already have the gold refinery finishing up under construction, right? Now, in Mali, we have the launch of the weapons industry, the domestic weapons industry. Now, apart from the fact that this is good for national defense in terms of now it's going to be less expensive to obtain weapons and ammunition, right? Because now you can manufacture it yourself. But also, this is a good project to undertake because now you're going to create jobs, right? And now, especially, one thing we don't talk about is when you shake down the multinational corporations or when you kick out the multinational corporations, right? That also leads to a loss of jobs because that's one of the incentives that the foreign multinationals give you in order for them to establish their presence. They say we can provide jobs to the local community, right? It's not that many jobs. It's not going to be able to employ the entire population, but they'll give you, a few hundred jobs, a few thousand jobs. But now when you establish domestic industries like these, now you can not only make up for the jobs that were lost when you shook down the foreign multinationals, but also now you can provide jobs to the community, right? And not only are you providing jobs to the community, but you're actually working towards something greater than simply just, clocking in and working for a foreign multinational, right? You're actually working towards the establishment of your national defense industry, something that's going to be a source of national pride that you can pass down for generations. So now, in the same way that we now have projects in the works to refine our own natural resources like Burkina Faso with the gold refinery, now we have weapons manufacturers domestic on site. So now we can refine our gold in Burkina. We manufacture our weapons in Bamako. And you already know in Niger, we got endless amounts of uranium and oil. Now, of course, as we already know, the oil project in Niger is currently being sabotaged by the terrorists and their foreign sponsors. But don't worry about nothing. We're going to get it right. Don't worry. Once we start manufacturing large-scale weapons down in Bamako, don't worry about nothing, man. All these terrorists you see running around, we're going to squash them like some cockroaches. Now, take a look up on the screen. As you can see, the Malian military aircrafts. Listen, we on land, we on sea, man, we on the water, we on the land, man, we in the air. Man, listen, the black man is omnipresent. You feel me? The black man is omnipresent. I'm telling you, we in the air, we on sea, we on land, we in the sky, man, we everywhere. And the black man is everywhere, man. They talking about some terrorists. No, it's the black man that's terrorizing the terrorists. They talking about some damn terrorists. Like I said, it's the black man terrorizing the terrorists. Get it right. Yeah, get it right. But yeah, man, if you remember, if you watched that video where I spoke about how Mali had won those billions of dollars from the mining sector in the first quarter of the year, and now how they put a portion of that towards paying their domestic and external debts. And now it seems they also put a portion of that into launching this domestic weapons industry. And that's how you got to do it, man. You got to take the money you make, reinvest it into other sectors that's going to be profitable in the future, and rinse and repeat, right? Take the profits you make, reinvest it into other sectors that's going to reap rewards in the future. Now, I want to jump into this article right here. Ghana and Mali pledged to upscale the fight against insurgency and terrorism. Let's get into it. President John Dramani Mahama has hailed Ghana and Mali relations, emphasizing Ghana's commitment to ensuring the security of the West African sub-region from terrorism and insurgency. We have noted the sovereign decisions of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to form a separate confederation. But despite that, God has placed us together in this sub-region for a purpose, he said. He assured the Malian president of the free flow of trade and movement between the two countries. President Mahama also extended his gratitude to President Goita for sending a strong delegation to honor him during his inauguration on January 7th. He expressed a willingness to arrange high-level visits between the two leaders once his administration was settled. Now, of course, it's still early, but so far the presidency of President Mahama in Ghana, the new president, is starting out on a positive note. As you can see, if you remember, Ibrahim Traore made the trip that made headlines, and now we see the strengthening of ties between Ghana and Mali in the arena of trade and defense. So, these are positive things on the horizon. Positive things on the horizon. Anyways, man, it's your boy Nefakari Salim back in the Billy. Yes, indeed. Cash app in the description. Support the channel, man.
been a few days since Africans in Ghana, as well as the new presidency of Ghana, showed the world how loved and appreciated President Traoré is. Despite how Western media has castigated and painted a bad narrative about Traoré, Africans have shown that they are not moved and they know the truth. But it's not just the African people that have lent their support to Traoré. In a recent interview, the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, gave a magnificent speech that not only supported the movement in the Sahel, but also revealed that the political elites in Africa know the truth. In today's video, we are going to analyze President Kagame's speech and highlight Rwanda's diplomatic relations with Burkina Faso. President Kagame started by analyzing the reason why the coups occurred in the Sahel region. From the time the coups started till now, Western media has always maintained that the reason for the coups was simply because the coup leaders saw an opportunity to take over power in the country. So, any action or decision taken by the military leaders, such as kicking out French forces or banning French media, is regarded as a form of maintaining control. However, the Rwandan president has shed a different light as to the reasons for the coup. He said, "People have been talking about the coups happening across our continent, but coups are bound to happen in a place where so much is happening and where the people are fed up with how things are going." Kagame's words are true. The countries in the Sahel region have been battling different challenges, especially insecurity and underdevelopment. This is coupled with the fact that the civilian governments in these countries were corrupt, incompetent, and worse, puppets of the West. As Traoré stated in one of his recent interviews, France dictated everything that went on in the military. The military of Burkina Faso, for instance, was not independent. And despite the number of years France spent in the region, supposedly fighting insecurity, the security situation did not improve. Rather, it got worse. So, the coups that happened were simply born out of the frustration of the army regarding the inability of the civilian government to deal with the security situation in the country. Kagame continued by saying, "Those who carry out the coups are a part of this society. They are citizens of these countries and have experienced the same frustrations, resentment, and anger, and a sense of justice. Some people may say that coups are unconstitutional, but according to Kagame, the unconstitutional only happened because the constitutional did not deliver to the people. It's exactly what happened in the Sahel region. These politicians come into positions of power pledging to fulfill different promises, but at the end of the day, nothing happens. While the citizens struggle to survive, these politicians live luxuriously with public funds and funds earned from corrupt deals." Moving on, Kagame gave a charge to the military leaders of the Sahel. He said those who have orchestrated the coups now have a task to ensure that they fulfill their pledges to the citizens who have supported them. They just give the citizens what is better than what they were getting before. Kagame also added that he sees that this is what is going on in the Sahel. There is a struggle to ensure that new developments are happening which will better serve the people. Now, if you take a critical look at all that has happened since the coups occurred in the Sahel, especially in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, you would observe that a lot of things have changed. Unlike civilian African leaders who are notable for not fulfilling their promises, the military leaders of the three countries have so far done their best in keeping to their words. From the very beginning, these leaders made their stand as Pan-African nationalists who believed in the sovereignty of their countries. And so far, they have taken decisions and actions in this light. Each of these countries has denounced France and severed ties with the imperialist country in a move that shocked even France. And the interesting thing is that other countries such as Chad and Senegal are following in their footsteps. But they have not just denounced their former colonial master, they have also prioritized their countries in terms of resource benefit. For a long time, the African continent has been associated with the resource curse, a situation whereby African countries have abundant resources, but remain among the poorest in the world because they have not benefited from their resources. However, things are starting to change in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The military leaders of these countries have embarked on a journey to nationalize their resources and ensure that the country gets the benefit it deserves. During civilian rule, the democratic leaders pandered to the whims of Western companies whose only interests were access to cheap materials and massive profits. These so-called democratic leaders agreed to ridicule deals that profited the Western companies more than the country. These corrupt leaders agreed because they had inside benefits in the deals. However, Burkina Faso, for instance, has embarked on the process of nationalizing its minerals, particularly its gold. Burkina Faso has built a gold factory where gold will be processed, adding more value to the country. This is a stark contrast to when gold was exported in its raw form at cheap rates. Niger, on the other hand, has taken control of its uranium mines from Orano, the French company that has dominated Niger's uranium industry since independence. In Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta is taking an aggressive approach, demanding a better revenue-sharing model from its gold mines. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. With all these, it's clear that these leaders are not all about words, but actions. They have clearly achieved far better in a few years than their civilian predecessors, who spend more than 8 years in power with nothing to show for it. Finally, Kagame called out the West's attitude of lecturing Africans on what they believe is the best. He said, "Africans need to reject lectures from the West because most times the West has a lot of confusion. We need to strive to do what works for us and improve people's lives." Kagame's message is clearly pointed out to Western countries, particularly France and the U.S. These countries are notable for sticking their nose in other countries' business. And, most of the time, after meddling in a country's affairs, the U.S. or France leaves those countries destabilized. They come into these countries supposedly as heroes and justice fighters, but they leave these countries in a worse state, creating even more problems for the people of these countries. It happened in Libya, Iraq, and Sudan. As for France, history tells us that it is majorly responsible for the current state of poverty and underdevelopment in Francophone Africa. So, as Kagame stated, African countries need to reject the lectures and dictates of the West and look for solutions by themselves. It happened in Libya, Iraq, and Sudan. As for France, history tells us that it is majorly responsible for the current state of poverty and underdevelopment in Francophone Africa. So, as Kagame stated, African countries need to reject the lectures and dictates of the West and look for solutions by themselves. Kagame further added, "What's so bad is that you may follow the dictate and end up doing the very thing that will run down your country." Interestingly, those who gave you the dictate will either blame you for running down the country, even though you followed their instructions, or they will help you to sink further into the mess. This is a very profound statement that we have seen play out over and over again. The West has painted this narrative that Africa's current state of economic development is a result of bad governance and incompetence. While that is true to an extent, the fact is that Africa's development started failing after African countries started implementing the so-called adjustment policy advocated by the IMF and World Bank, both of which are Western-led financial institutions. African leaders implemented these policies in exchange for loans, and the rest is history. Despite the fact that research has proven this true, the West keeps on advocating the same policies as what would help Africa to grow. This is why Kagame has said that African countries need to reject Western dictates and lectures and chart their own course. And it is exactly what is happening in the Sahel. The military leaders have chosen not to listen to the dictates of the West and chart their own course by rejecting Western allies and embracing non-Western allies. So far, they have gotten amazing results. President Kagame's words are remarkable and are a testament to the kind of leader he is. It's no wonder that Kagame was one of the first African leaders that Traoré collaborated with a few months after the coup. In November 2023, high-ranking military delegates from Burkina Faso traveled to Rwanda for a meeting with the Rwandan security forces. These delegates were on a mission to meet with the Rwandan security forces and share ideas on security issues. Upon arrival in Kigali, the Burkinabe delegation visited the Campaign Against Genocide Museum located in Kigali City. This museum tells the story of the campaign by the Rwandan Patriotic Army to end the genocide against the Tutsi, and also how the fighters who were rebel groups at the time conducted rescue missions to not just save the victims of genocide across the country, but also fight and defeat genocidal forces. The Burkinabe delegate also visited the Rwandan military headquarters, where they met with the Minister of Defense, Juvenal Marizamunda, and the Rwanda Chief of Defense Staff, Lieutenant Gen M.K. Mubarak, to discuss ways of strengthening cooperation with Rwanda Defense Force in Burkina Faso. In addition, The Burkinabe delegates visited and received briefings on selected defense facilities and welfare schemes, including Zagama CSS, military medical insurance, armed forces shop, and the Rwanda Military Academy GACO. However, this military meeting between Rwanda and Burkina Faso was not the end of the collaboration between both countries. In the same month, on the 21st, the Burkinabe Inspector General of the Police, Controller General Dr. Roger Ouedraogo, paid a visit to his counterpart, Felix Namuhoranye, in Kigali, Rwanda, for a bilateral meeting to build stronger policing relations between the two police forces. The Burkinabe IGP spent 1 week in Rwanda discussing ways to strengthen police cooperation. Now, one thing that can be inferred from the meeting between the security forces of Burkina Faso and Rwanda is that Captain Traoré sent his delegates to learn. This was confirmed by the Burkinabe IGP, Dr. Ouedraogo, who said that, "We have come to learn from Rwanda's policing, which is exemplary. We want to pick a leaf from its contribution to the country's security and development." Dr. Ouedraogo and his team must have learned a lot, because he added, "We have so far witnessed some of the community development activities that Rwanda police engages in together with the citizenry, how the police work with the people in security matters. So, from this, we know that Captain Ibrahim Traoré is a wise leader who is not afraid to seek counsel from those who have gotten it right. But why Rwanda? Why did Captain Traoré choose to send his delegates to learn and build relations with Rwanda and not Ghana or Nigeria? Well, like the Rwandan IGP said during his talk with the IGP of Burkina Faso, both countries have some things in common, especially when it comes to security and development. Burkina Faso is currently faced with a security crisis that has left thousands of people dead and millions displaced from their homes. This insecurity has greatly affected the developmental status of the country. In the same way, more than 20 years ago, Rwanda was also faced with a daunting security crisis, which also affected their development. The only difference is that while the security crisis in Burkina Faso is currently caused by armed insurgent groups including Al-Qaeda, that of Rwanda was internal conflict resulting in widespread genocide of the Tutsi people of Rwanda. But then, when Paul Kagame came into the game, things changed. The insecurity has been dealt with and the country has achieved a form of development. If you think about it, it does make sense that Captain Traoré chose Rwanda for its military and police officials to learn from, because Rwanda has experienced what they are currently experiencing in terms of insecurity, but they fought it and won. So, the partnership between Rwanda and Burkina Faso can be likened to that of a junior student who is learning from a senior student. Now, the big question is, did Ibrahim Traoré make a smart move seeking collaboration with Rwanda? The answer is yes, and we are going to give you 3 reasons why we think so. Number 1, Rwanda is a practical example of how a country ravaged by insecurity can be rebuilt. When Paul Kagame became Rwanda's president in 2000, he inherited a country that had been torn apart by genocide. The genocide of the Tutsi people was as a result of the Hutu militias who were supposedly revenging the deaths of 2 prominent Hutus, Presidents Juvenal Habyarimana of Rwanda and Cyprien Ntaryamira of Burundi, whose plane was shot down while about to land in Kigali, Rwanda's capital city. The tragic incident blew open years of animosity and struggle for political power between the 2 ethnic groups. For about 100 apocalyptic days, a bloody campaign unfolded while the rest of the world silently looked on. According to the records, about 800,000 Tutsi people were killed during this period. It truly was a bloody time in the history of Rwanda, and this was the situation that Paul Kagame was faced with. To rebuild the country, President Kagame had to rely on mostly uneducated guerrilla fighters and a handful of ill-trained cadres. Even the most optimistic of analysts doubted his chances, just like the West, and even some Africans don't believe that Ibrahim Traoré can rebuild Burkina Faso. However, it's more than 20 years since President Kagame came into power, and Rwanda is currently stable, prosperous, unified, and, in large part, reconciled. Rwandan mothers receive ante- and postnatal healthcare and maternal mortality ratios in the country decreased by 77% between 2000 and 2013. Newborns are vaccinated. The city is clean and people can walk safely at night. In 2019, Kagame told ministers that they would no longer need security personnel, adding that their security would be guaranteed like that of other Rwandan citizens. Rwanda is currently considered as one of Africa's leading lights on information communication and technology because of its technological advances. A country that once had shattered institutions of government has been rebuilt and gained a reputation for efficiency and probity in administration that is today the envy of Africa. So, if there is any country that Burkina Faso needs to model after, it is Rwanda. Captain Traore knows this, and that's why he wants to build relations with them, which is pretty smart of him. Number 2, Rwanda has strong leadership, which is what Burkina Faso also needs. If you go on social media, one thing that you will discover is that, aside from being credited as the person who transformed Rwanda into what it is today, President Kagame is also described as a decisive and authoritarian leader. While this may seem like a bad quality to human rights activists and proponents of Western ideologies, it cannot be denied that Paul Kagame's style of leadership is what makes Rwanda what it is today. President Kagame has been accused of being undemocratic, curtailing press and political freedoms, and changing the constitution to remain president beyond his legal term. Well, they are correct, but it was what Rwanda needed. Think about the fact that Kagame had to build a unified country with the same people, killers and their victims living side by side with a unity of purpose, the betterment of their village, the district, their country. Of course, he has to be tough and strict. It doesn't matter whether or not people like his methods, his result speaks. And besides, Kagame wasn't the one who changed the constitution to extend his term after it ended. It was the citizens of Rwanda who did. This shows that Rwandans are cool with their president, and what is democracy if it's not that the people are okay with the leadership? If Burkina Faso is to be rebuilt, then it will need a strong leader who can make decisive decisions that will bring great change. Ibrahim Traore already seems like a strong leader, but a collaboration with Rwanda would further strengthen his leadership. Finally, a Burkina Faso-Rwanda collaboration is good because it is an African-African partnership, and any African-African partnership is a smart move. One of the reasons why Europe easily conquered the African continent is because the African tribes sold each other out. Imagine if they came together to fight these foreign invaders, there would have been a higher chance of Europe not colonizing Africa. The West knows this, that's why they divided the tribes into different colonies which later became countries after they gained independence. It's highly unlikely that Africa will go back to the way it used to be before colonization. So the only way is to move on, which means an African that collaborates and partners with each other. A united Africa. The more there are more partnerships between African countries, the more the fight for a united Africa is actualized. A partnership between Rwanda and Burkina Faso means that if Burkina Faso calls for help in fighting the jihadists, Rwanda would likely respond, and frankly speaking, Burkina Faso needs all the help it can get to deal with the problem. Supposing the African Union or ECOWAS are good and strong institutions that are not puppets of Western governments, the issue of armed insurgents in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and all across Africa would have been dealt with. Instead of leaving the issues for only one country to deal with, these blocs should have organized every African country to deal with the issue. But sadly, the African Union and ECOWAS have failed in their duty, and they are nothing more than figureheads. Regardless, President Ibrahim Traore is moving in the right direction, seeking partnerships among African countries. Africa belongs to Africa, and only Africa can deal with African problems.
But I see you, fellas. Thank you for all the South African. So we are at Togo. Here's Togo. Here's a map. I'm going to show you the map because I know a lot of you don't know geography. Yes, here's Togo. Beautiful place, lovely people. I've been there before. Great culture, amazing. You know, they have a lot of beliefs, African belief. You heard about voodoo? You usually say voodoo, but it's called voodoo. This is voodoo in Togo. You're going to call it many names. Some people say it's witchcraft. Some people say a lot of things, but their spiritual belief, they believe in these entities. They believe in many things. They believe there is a God of iron. Okay, the God of iron is the one that causes accident. Okay, they believe if somebody doesn't like you, or if you happen to steal something from somebody and somebody cries to the god of iron against you, my brother, you're gonna have a very bad accident. You're most likely not gonna come out alive, because apparently the god of iron loves blood. There is a god of fertility. He has a big, yeah, a big wood. I'm not gonna say. Anyway, so Togolese people have their culture. It's part of the culture. They believe in it. That stuff that you see moving, there's no human inside. No human is inside. You can pull it off. You see that thing spinning, running? There's nothing. They just pray for that thing. It starts running. I'm telling you. And don't try to go open it. Anyway, let's get back on track. Great people have spent some of the most beautiful time. I mean, that's why I always encourage you fellas. Go see the next African country. Go visit. Don't sit there saying, my country, me and my country, I ate white bread with. You need to see. In order for you to understand the world, you need to understand what's happening in the next country, not from things you see on TV. Okay, it's not accurate. All right, let's get back on track. Great people, lovely people. Okay, now, these are the three countries that are the superstars in Africa. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. You know them. Why? Because they decided to kick out the colonialists out of the country. How do they have the colonialists? Well, the colonialists came before 1960. They took over Africa. As you can see, these are French African speaking countries. How did they become French African speaking countries? Because France, yes, France, okay? France came all the way to Africa and took over all these countries. How did they do it? With weapons. They had gunshots. At the time, Africans did not have gunshots. Therefore, they had the superiority in terms of armament. That is how they unalived many African people and took these lands. Now, could they have done it by themselves? Well, no. Why? Because some Africans were corrupt. They were promised money and success and many other things. Those Africans are the one that guided these French people into taking over all these countries. And another reason, because those Africans didn't like the neighbor. You know, you don't like the neighbor. You're ready to make a deal with the devil so you can get the neighbor overthrown. Not saying French are the devil. I'm just giving you an example. Okay. Anyway, now these three countries with these leaders, you can see their soldiers say they don't want colonialism anymore. Why? Because the French, after independence in 1960, made all these French-speaking countries sign a piece of paper saying, we can still keep our military on your ground, on your land. And number two, we're going to be printing your money, your currency. Yes, this currency right here. You heard me correctly. The money that's used in these French African countries, most of these are Western African countries, it's called the CFA franc. Now, the CFA franc is still being printed in France before being sent to Africa for African use. But you cannot buy a piece of bread with the CFA franc in France. So it has no value in France. Yeah. But it's millions in Africa. Now, get me, once I'm printing your money, I can easily get your economy going up and going down whenever I like, right? Anyway, now, the big question was asked to the foreign minister of Togo, whether Togo would consider joining the AEC, which is the Alliance of States of Sahel. And the minister was very clear. He says, for me, it's not impossible, but it's the decision of the president of the republic first. It's also a decision of the Togolese parliament. If parliament decide that Togo must join AEC countries, why would Togo not do so? I will surprise you. Ask the Togolese population if Togo want to join the AEC, and you will see their answer. They will tell you yes. So yes. Fellas, let me remind you here, these three countries were at some point blocked from doing any business. I can explain. You can see they are inland countries, so they have no border to the sea. The sea is very important. Many people don't know that. Why is the sea important? The sea is very important because you need the sea to do business, okay? Imagine you want to buy goods coming from China, a lot of it, okay? Cars and stuff like that. There are two ways to bring the cars and the stuff. You can either bring it by aeroplane, okay, which is going to be very, very expensive and very limited in terms of capacity, or you can bring it through the sea with ships, okay? But the ships is big. You can bring a lot of things. Now, when you have the sea, your coast or side in your country, it makes it easy for you. But the countries that inland locked countries have to cooperate with the countries that are on board of the sea so they can get their stuff moving. However, all these countries down here, part of the ECOWAS, don't like these three countries. Why don't they like them? They don't like them because they toppled their president. They changed the president in an undemocratic way. They used weapons to do it. But did they unalive the president? No, they did not unalive the president because they came in peace. Their goal was to just take over the country because they felt like those presidents were not doing what they were supposed to do as president. They were not looking after the people. Now, these other countries were upset, especially the presidents. Why? Because they felt like if we allow them to do that, they're going to be inspiring our population into rising up against us. That's how a dictator thinks. Now, let me protect my power. The best way to protect my power, I need to punish the guy that just attacked his leader, even though the leader was not necessarily a nice person. Now, that's what happened. When these countries blocked those three countries from exporting and importing, they were clapping hands saying, okay, we're going to see how they're going to survive. They're going to suffer. Okay. Within a week or so, the population will be very angry and they will come down the street and they will topple them. Okay. Now, that's never happened. Why did that never happen? Because Malian people supported their brand new government. They were behind them. They say, hey, we've had enough too. We're going to support you. Now, in the meantime, Togo played the middle ground when these countries were trying to attack Niger and destroy. Togo said, okay, we can be the middleman. Okay, can we sit down and never talk? Whilst these other French-speaking African nations who are slaves of the French, sorry to say that, but most of them don't even know their own languages. They will laugh at you if your French is broken. Okay, they will laugh at you even more if you speak in your own language. That's how sad that is. If you speak a good French, they go, oh, you sound very intelligent. Crazy. Anyway, get back on track. Now, the Togolese went to see these three countries and say, let's have a talk in a very nice way. Okay. And that created, built the rapprochement between Togo and all these countries. And to the benefit of Lomé, now Niger is already using Togo's port to export. Niger used to send things through Benin. Can you see the map? That's Niger. Here's Benin. Most of the things coming from Niger to be exported there to go through Benin. But Benin president said he doesn't want that. He blocked the way. And Niger have petrol, a lot of oil that they used to export. At some point, Benin refused to let Niger export the oil because they were not talking to each other, like little girls. But Togo said, okay, we cool, and Niger is now exporting things past Togo. Now, that's negative for Benin because now Benin has lost business, because when I'm doing things through your port, I'm certainly paying some money. When your people are coming through my people to steal bananas, carrots and small things, food, they're making some money. So there's no burden from the population to the government. But now that they have closed the border, that cannot happen anymore. Okay, so now Togo is profiting from this opportunity to grow. So my question to you is this before we close. How do you feel about that? Benin said, we don't want to let you export your stuff through our port because you are undemocratic. Okay, we didn't do an election. Okay, you toppled the president. Therefore, we're not going to allow you. Niger said, okay, that's fine. No problem. Now, month later, the Beninese people started suffering because they used to cross the border and sell food, sell things, get this, get that. Some of them even had the side chicks on that side. It's become very difficult because you're not getting anything from the side chick. People got very angry at the government. Now the government of Benin is trying to knock at the door of Niger, say, please, allow us in. And the Niger said, no, you refuse, that's fine. You can stay that way. No, and then the president came out and made a speech. No, it's unacceptable. You cannot do this. Open the border. But you close the border, my brother, because you wanted to please the French. Now, Niger has accused Benin of hosting French soldiers. After Niger kicked out the French soldiers, Benin apparently, allegedly, as per Niger, is hosting French soldiers that are staying there. They're hiding. They're just waiting for the right opportunity to pounce on Niger and overthrow the government. Because France has been accused many times of overthrowing African leaders that they deem are not favorable to them. That's why Niger refused to open the border. And the Beninese said, we know there's no French here. The Niger said, no, we know they're there. We even know where they're sitting. We know because obviously they got intelligence from the Russians. Let me know how you feel about this. Is Togo a good move? Now, I mean, is this the way most African countries
wanted to raise something real quick before we go, because I think, as you know, we've been talking in the past couple of shows, we got the incoming Trump administration next Monday, January 20th. He will be inaugurated. A lot of people wondering what he's going to do from a foreign policy perspective. You know, Africa is kind of a black hole in terms of what Trump may do. And, you know, I think some people consider that to be good. Like, they think Trump won't really do that much there. But you can see that many of the worst actors on African issues are now lobbying the Trump administration to take certain actions. And you know, we've done a lot on this show to cover Eritrea. We traveled there together. I've traveled there several times myself. We've reported on it. So I just want to note, even though, you know, it's a small country in Africa, people don't think a lot about it. But a guy named Michael Rubin, who's sort of a high up kind of guy in the think tank diplomatic government world. Now he works at the American Enterprise Institute, published an article, I think about a week and a half ago, calling on the Trump administration to carry out regime change in Eritrea, saying now is the time. And anyone who follows Eritrea, you know, or honestly any country where there's regime change, same basic story. It's evil, it's a dictatorship, there's all these bad things. And now is the great opportunity for America to bring freedom and democracy to Eritrea. So this is actually a long running issue. Eritrea is under sanctions, it's been under sanctions. There's consistent sort of calls from people like Michael Rubin, but in a context where, you know, you may have a kind of tabula rasa type situation in the Trump administration, you know, I think it can be particularly dangerous because these things can kind of sneak in, if you will, if there's not necessarily awareness of what's going on. And I want to raise it for a couple of reasons that I think are very important for people to recognize why this is a bad idea. I mean, first and foremost, we're talking about Eritrea, which is in the Horn of Africa, which is already one of the parts of the world that is the most war torn. I mean, Sudan, which we talked about earlier on this show, Ethiopia, which has numerous running conflicts, Somalia, which has numerous running conflicts, you know, an area of the world where people have been intensely suffering due to many different wars, interventions, sanctions, most of which have their roots, by the way, in sort of imperial policy to shape and control the Horn of Africa because it's so geostrategically important. It sits right there in the Suez Canal, on the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Indian Ocean. And so going well back into the, you know, the 1800s, this has been one of the main areas for imperialists to try to control, and it often destabilized. So Eritrea is essentially the only country in the region that has any stability whatsoever. I mean, it's very stable, actually. It's the only stable country that's not really being racked by a war right now, a civil war, a really bad one in many different cases. And undoubtedly, any attempt at regime change in Eritrea would destabilize that country, because this is a country that, like many countries that are targeted for regime change, whatever critiques people have, there are many people who support the current government and undoubtedly would stand up and push back against regime change, which means the country would be torn apart. So a region that is already suffering, you know, unimaginable horrors from destabilization, sanctions, different regime change efforts that have existed would be sunk even deeper into the mire, and the people of Eritrea and the surrounding countries could only suffer any more. So in the same way we look at Iraq, in the same way we look at Libya, in the same way we look at all of these different countries, this effort in general, just beyond anything else, to try to ask for and push for regime change in Eritrea by elements that are, you know, in the Republican Party, so they feel like they can influence Trump,
C.I.A.
is very, very dangerous for African people in the Horn of Africa. And then one other thing I want to just note about this, or two other things quickly. You know, one is the rationale for this. You know, and as you know, Rania, very well, there's always this intense targeting. But when you really look at Eritrea and compare it to other countries in Africa, and I think that's the most important thing from a contextual point of view, and you look at also the countries that are U.S. allies, you really start to ask some questions about why this is a country that's being targeted. I mean, for instance, Kenya, one of the #1 allies of the United States. Ruto was here. They're a major non-NATO ally now. They're getting weapons. They're getting money. They're sort of fronting the U.S. occupation in Haiti, all of these different things. Well, Eritrea has a higher life expectancy than Kenya. And life expectancy, of course, is heavily associated with access to public health resources, many different other things. But it's a #1 indicator, or one of the main indicators of overall quality of life, and certainly of income inequality. So Eritrea, higher life expectancy than Kenya. You don't hear Michael Rubin or any of these other people saying, let's have regime change in Kenya. In fact, they're talking about getting closer with Kenya. Eritrea has a child mortality rate that is lower, or better, you should say, than Uganda, also close U.S. ally. A little bit more on the rocks, but you don't hear anyone saying, let's overthrow Uganda. It has a higher literacy rate than Zambia or Rwanda. So that means that they're teaching more people to read than those two countries, which are two of the closest allies to the United States. Zambia now is becoming a base. They're moving U.S. military people there. They even have the Venezuelan opposition trying to set up a school for regime change around the world in Zambia. Rwanda, of course, everyone knows. And quite frankly, you know, not that I'm any big fan of the liberal Western style democracy, but if you're going to be writing articles talking about Eritrea doesn't have democracy, I don't know how you can then say Rwanda is a good friend. So again, you have countries like Kenya, Zambia, Rwanda, very close. You know, Namibia, and this is no shade on Namibia. No shade on them at all. But just to note, they got their independence at roughly the same time as Eritrea. In Eritrea, 80% of people live within 2 hours of walking of a healthcare facility, 76% in Namibia. So obviously that's a sign. Namibia has not been under sanctions, you know, in many ways more favorable economic environment. And again, that's not to shade them whatsoever. It's a very difficult situation for all African countries. But again, Eritrea doing better. So that's what you don't hear. You don't hear that they have a higher life expectancy than Kenya, higher literacy than Zambia and Rwanda, that they actually have a better access to healthcare than a country like Namibia, that they're above the sub-Saharan African average in terms of rural access to electricity. You don't hear any of those things. So why is it that now people are saying, let's have regime change in Eritrea? Well, I think you can answer that question very easily. Eritrea does not sign up to the broader U.S. agenda in the region and around the world. So, I mean, they were sanctioned for standing up against the balkanization of Somalia in the early 2000s. They were sanctioned by the United Nations, basically for saying that Somalia should not be broken apart, destroyed, and thrown into civil war. When there was a regime change operation in Ethiopia to reinstall the TPLF, which was the U.S. proxy in the region, Eritrea stepped up and they opposed that as well. In the context of what we've even been seeing happen in Palestine. I mean, they have been outspoken at all international forums on that issue and always voted in favor of all the UN resolutions around Palestine and Gaza and things that have been going forward. It's a country that fiercely values its independence and that consistently argues that the future of the Horn of Africa should be for the people of the Horn of Africa, the future of Africa should be for the people of Africa, and that these outside imperial actors, you know, should not be able to determine things. Now, it doesn't mean they don't say they want relations with anyone who's open to have relations, but that other countries shouldn't be dictating to Africa the way they have for 500 years. And of course, that is the worst possible thing. And every country that says that is aggressively targeted. We've seen it in Zimbabwe. We're seeing it now in the Sahel. And that's what's really happening, you know, in Eritrea. And I think it's important for people to look at, and this is where I'll close, Rania, because the other big push that's happening from a lot of folks in the sort of right-wing sphere who follow Africa is to push the Trump administration to recognize Somaliland, which is a region of Somalia that is sort of trying to set itself up as an independent country. And just so you know, Rania, the thing that Somaliland officials are now saying about why the U.S. should recognize them is because they'll put a U.S. military base in Somaliland, and that will allow the U.S. to have control, greater control over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, over the Red Sea, to be able to have a base to attack Yemen, and that the U.S. base should move from Djibouti to Somaliland because you can't trust Djibouti because they also got a Chinese base there. So Somaliland, which also is one of the few countries that still recognizes Taiwan as the ruler of all China, yep, that's right, they do, is saying, yes, please set up a military base here. We'll be so pro-U.S. and so pro-UK, and they've got a big lobby of people in the U.S. and the UK, but that undoubtedly will only deepen the conflict in Somalia. You know, Somali people in many other parts of the country are fiercely opposed to this dismemberment. So you've got this push coming from people to say, let's do regime change in Eritrea, let's recognize Somaliland in the Trump administration, and all of it is of one piece, to try to make sure that the broader Horn of Africa, Red Sea, Nile Basin area, it remains within the control of imperial dictates, that any country that is standing up to that is weakened, and that the area is balkanized and racked in war, which they're not that concerned about. They're happy for these places to be racked in war, because ultimately, to the extent they start to come together, it can really shift the balance of power on a world scale. The same thing in many other parts of the region. You see that divide and conquer is the way they want to rule. So, you know, Eritrea is a small country that not a lot of people hear about, but I think, you know, it's important to note some of these things, because if it's not brought out into the light of the day, that's how these policies, you know, can sort of sneak up, and it will be devastating for the entire region of the Horn of Africa for these types of moves, like a regime change push. And I think anyone who cares about, you know, not having more wars and more destruction in Africa, you know, really should raise their voice on this. And I just hope that you check out some of what we've done about Eritrea here at Breakthrough News. I know for some people, they don't like what we have to say, but I think ultimately it's an important perspective to understand African countries, development in African nations, and what possibly can come and what we will hopefully see come for Africa here in the rest of this century, which is real self-determination and liberation. So sorry for that
No, I
monologue
mean,
there,
that's
but
really,
you know.
no, I think it's really important. I think people need to take very seriously this neoconservative attitude about the world, which really at this point exists in both parties. But you know, the neocons, they always make a comeback, and they have this good and evil view of the world that doesn't actually have any basis in reality in terms, because there's no such thing as good and evil. Like that's just a very black and white view of the world, but it's a very convenient view of the world that literally just places any country in the category of evil for showing any defiance whatsoever to US dictates. That's it. That's all it is. All of this talk about human rights, like, God, the propaganda is so real on that issue, but it's not, the US does not care. Certainly neoconservatives do not care. And when they're talking about overthrowing governments and collapsing states, that is a very violent act. It kills hundreds of thousands to millions of people to do something like that. So anybody professing to want to do that in the name of human rights is full of BS. And it's a scary prospect, because these sorts of people, they have ears of the powerful. They have a say in both sides or both parties that control US empire. And I just want to point out, to kind of in the, you know, pattern of what you're talking about with Eritrea, there's an article by Brett Stevens at the New York Times from yesterday. Literally, the title is "Depose Maduro." And the whole article is about how the, Donald Trump administration should make one of their priorities the overthrow of Nicolas Maduro, the recently reelected president of Venezuela. And he says through coercive diplomacy, if possible, or force if necessary. I mean, these people are, the arrogance, the mafia-like arrogance of these people is so extreme. They live in such a delusional fantasy world where they think they can just pick off entire countries full of millions of people if they don't like the people who are in power in those countries. And they do it in this framework of human rights that, again, should be completely rejected. So I appreciate that you explained all of that, because this is a serious threat to actual people, like millions of people who stand to like die and have their lives completely upended, and be made into refugees and be exposed to all kinds of violence if the US has its way on these kinds of things.
I think that capitalism has given us incredible technology, art, science, medicine. But there's this new form of capitalism that I call predatory capitalism. That's the enemy of true capitalism. Let me explain.
In 1975, during the Church Committee, there were numerous revelations about the practices that the CIA employed to eliminate leaders around the world. These methods were employed everywhere, and nowhere more violently than in Africa and parts of South America. The CIA has been shown to be behind the assassination or ouster of Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Marcus Garvey, Muammar Gaddafi, Kwame Nkrumah, Laurent Gbagbo, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and so many more. But the reason they did it will shock you.
The organization constitutes an attempt to replace the old system of colonial exploitation by a new system of collective colonialism, which will be stronger and more dangerous than the old evils we are striving to liquidate from our continent.
A decade later, coming out of the independence movement, when one of the most enduring voices of the Black and African movement spoke the following words, his prophetic verb exposed the true source of evil that bound the wrists of a whole planet. He said, and I quote, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." These words would ultimately get him assassinated a year later. But what he didn't realize is that that behavior he called out, defense spending, wasn't just Orwellian in its name, but that after analysis, the system, because of its very nature, had no option but to revert to violence, and that black people everywhere were the unfortunate historical target. The perfect target. A target that had the exact elixir that the short-sighted, abominable demon needed to survive. A seven-headed beast that has devoured all of our heroes in its gluttony for money over people. A beast with fancy names like IMF, WTO, World Bank, UN, European Parliament, NATO, G7, that brandishes the flag of progress as a justification for all its atrocities. And yet, when taken into full view, it, in effect, slows down the whole planetary progress. And that beast is capitalism. Not the true free market capitalism, but the bastardized version of it that is upheld by the West. Often sold in a package with democracy and labeled as free market enterprise, capitalism has been pushed on as a model of choice for development for the world. Within countries that have adopted this model, capitalism has massively concentrated power to a very few and, in the same process, created massive amounts of corruption that has stifled development after an initial burst of success. Those who own the capital and the corporations that run them use that power to, number one, keep power, and number two, erode the very fabric of democracy and thus the power of the free market system. Why? It's because in order to maintain an organism that is no longer competitive in a free market system, the organism has no choice but to transform itself or rig the game. It has to transform the rules to its advantage. And that is one of the main reasons why our code of laws has become so complex, riddled with loopholes and special interests. In great majority, these laws are there to prevent competition or force the consumer or its tax contribution into an arrangement that the people themselves do not want, from lobbyists to corrupt officials. And so, the organism survives through laws and politicians it paid for and is not replaced by a better one, at least one that is better for the people. This is not because capitalism isn't good. It is because the brand of capitalism that we have in the West, and there are many versions of capitalism, the one we use in the West has been allowed to operate under a model where the corporation has become more important than people. This is why globalism can be seen as the extension of capitalism to the whole world, and why its results mirror the results of what happens within one country, meaning that rich countries are the capital holders, and all other countries are its employees, its workforce. So the poorer countries become subservient to the interests of the rich ones, and over time, in order to maintain that order, illogical rules are forced onto and maintained onto the resource-rich countries. And these rules are not designed to help the people and develop a fair trade, a global free market, but instead, they are there to erode the wealth and freedom of most people for the benefit of a few countries. We are then sold an excuse of lack of industrialization as an explanation for the deplorable state of the poor countries, as if African countries are incapable of thinking about and wanting to industrialize. Funny enough, history shows Africa has always wanted and tried to industrialize, but, as we shall see, even the thought of it was met with such a level of violence that Joe Perkins titled his book after those who carry out these atrocities and destabilize. Perkins called it an economic hitman, or if it is not industrialization, it is corruption that is brought forth as a reason. All the while overlooking that the Western countries are extremely corrupt, so much so that it is institutionalized, and for decades that corruption has also been imposed onto the poorer countries, where efforts to clean up the political class are met with the same fate. So when a poor country realizes this and tries to free itself from this model of servitude, where its natural resources and its workforce are not benefiting its own people, those who control capital intervene, just as they do within a country, but this time they do it on an international stage. This is simply because those at the top of the system are dependent on the output of the poor countries, and they will use any means to keep that status quo. from forcing corruption models of operations to eliminating any ideas of divergence, and that includes the assassination of these leaders. They bend the rules to make the uncompetitive corporation and country survive, at the cost of the African individual's freedom, but also at the cost or planetary-wide progress and well-being. But this does not mean that the narrative of the rich countries are true. It is merely an excuse to exercise force so that they can maintain power. And it comes in many forms: economic disfavoritism, where mainstream Americans receive funding at the end of the war that enables them to buy property while their black counterparts are denied the same advantages, let alone the right to purchase land. It also comes in the form of class divide, where race is used as an easy cop-out, where fake scientific models and indicators are used to label the black man as less than his brethrens. It further appears as historical theft, where black history is denied or reattributed to people who did not build our past. And finally, it shows up as the savior complex, where the current holders of power pretend that they have a duty to, quote, help the poor countries, end quote, which usually means military intervention that usually result in the country of the black nation being far worse of. All of these actions only make sense when looked at from the standpoint of an organism that depends on black nations in order to survive. In fact, a different model is used for Arabic majority countries because the West is dependent on their oil. In this instance, it is their oil that the West is after, and the label used to justify the use of force is that they are terrorists. It is in part why Nelson Mandela had such a liking to Yasser Arafat, because he recognized that the fight for freedom of the black man is the same fight that those living in the Middle East were facing, in that in an effort to maintain a planetary imbalance of power of monumental scale, they had to remove the humanity of a whole group in order to enact an agenda of control that feeds the beast with its 7 heads. A beast masquerading as a salesman of free market, but that only spits out less freedom for all. And we will start with the young man from Central Africa, who wanted to use the natural resources of the 11th largest country in the world. A young man well ahead of his time, but who stood up against a mighty colonial power, freed his people, if only for a little while. I would like to take a few moments to remind you all that Without History does not take any sponsors precisely because we want to remain an independent voice which speak for out true history. It is through your donations and memberships on Patreon and YouTube that we are able to do what we do. You can find the support links in the video description. Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, stood as a beacon of Pan-African unity and economic independence. His vision centered on harnessing Congo's vast mineral wealth for the benefit of its citizens rather than foreign corporations. Lumumba called for national unity and rejected neo-colonial interference. The Congo emerged from brutal Belgian colonial rule, marked by systemic exploitation and impoverishment of the native population. Despite its vast mineral resources, the majority of Congolese lived in dire poverty. Infrastructure was minimal, and access to education and political representation was virtually non-existent. Lumumba started as a revolutionary by writing his thoughts in newspapers and quickly gained a strong voice with the support of the people. In 1958, the same year that he launched his party, the MNC, Lumumba went to Ghana where he delivered one of his memorable speeches. There, he impressed the whole Africa with his Pan-African vision, his leadership and brightness. The Belgians, noticing that there was a strong anti-colonialism movement rising up in Africa, tried to front-end the movement by staging elections, which they announced in 1959. Unfortunately for them, Lumumba read through the charade and boycotted the elections. This culminated into riots in 1960, which were highly suppressed by the Belgian authorities. Belgium-led security forces fired indiscriminately in the crowds. 30 Congolese were reported killed in Kisangani, but in reality, the number would have been much higher. Lumumba was immediately arrested by the Belgian government on charges of inciting violence. That is when the MNC party decided to join the elections, where it won 90% of the votes. After winning, they immediately demanded the release of Lumumba, who became Congo's first prime minister. His inauguration speech, till this day, stands as one of the benchmarks of anti-imperialism, but more importantly, of a true African vision. And he delivered this speech, with the Belgian leaders and the Belgian king in attendance. He defiantly declared, "We have experienced forced labor in exchange for pay that did not allow us to satisfy our hunger, to clothe ourselves, to have decent lodgings, or to bring up our children as dearly loved ones. Morning, noon, and night, we were subjected to jeers, insults, and blows because we were Negroes." This shocked the Belgian king in attendance, who miscalculated and was expecting a speech of servitude. But Lumumba had written his speech in secret, and he was even photographed finalizing his speech, while the King of Belgium delivered his tone-deaf remarks. But it is when he spoke the following word that the West decided to oust him. "We shall show the world what the black man can do when working in liberty, and we shall make the Congo the pride of Africa. We shall see to it that the lands of our native country truly benefit its children." End quote. And yet, what could be more natural than to use the natural resources of your land to better the condition of your own people? Lumumba did not advocate for the African to steal resources from America. He did not advocate to starve Europe by suspending export of grain. He did not ask that 5% of the Belgian population get their right hand cut off because they didn't want to work for the Congolese people. No, all he asked for was for self-determination. The same self-determination that Martin Luther King and Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey, and Malcolm X were advocating for. These words sent a signal to the world that Africa had arrived and was ready to take their determination into their own hands. And instead of looking for ways to partner with Africa and the Congo, the West used its colonial intelligence agency to torture and eliminate Lumumba. The cover story used by American state officials was that Lumumba was turning to the Russians for military aid, and so this could not be allowed. This is where you must ask yourself, when was the last time you got your leg cut off because you wanted to buy some soup instead of a hamburger?
In January of 1961, over 50 years ago, Lumumba, who was a prisoner of CIA-financed Congolese leaders who had replaced him after a coup, he was transferred by them to a Belgian-backed so-called independent province of Katanga, which had most of the wealth of the Congo. And he was then tortured and murdered by the Katangese and their white officers, Belgian officers.
The real reason why the CIA got involved in an affair involving the Belgium and Congolese is because U.S. economic and strategic interests were heavily reliant on minerals from the Congo, and it comes in multiple forms.
People up to now haven't focused very much on the CIA role, partly because
they won't do no good business.
the Church Committee, a committee of the United States Senate, investigated this and determined, and this is the quote, "Lumumba was killed by Congolese rivals. It does not appear from the evidence that the United States was in any way involved with the killing." But this is a mistake.
The Congo's Shinkolobwe mine in Katanga province was a critical source of uranium for the United States. During World War II and the early Cold War, uranium from this mine supplied the Manhattan Project, leading to the development of the first atomic bombs. By 1959, uranium remained vital for the U.S. nuclear arsenal and its civilian nuclear energy programs. The Congo's high-grade uranium ore was among the richest in the world and indispensable for the U.S. military-industrial complex. Cobalt, another resource abundant in the Congo, was essential for the production of jet engines, high-strength alloys, and rechargeable batteries. The U.S. viewed cobalt as a critical material for its defense and aerospace sectors. The Congo was one of the world's largest producers of cobalt, making it a key supplier to the U.S. during the Cold War. Copper from the Congo was vital for electrical wiring, infrastructure development, and manufacturing in the U.S. The Congo was among the leading global producers of copper, and its exports helped meet the high demand in the growing U.S. economy. The Congo was a major source of industrial diamonds, used in drilling, cutting, and grinding applications. Industrial diamonds were critical for the U.S. automotive and construction industries, as well as for defense purposes. And the list goes on. But instead of working with the new Congolese leadership and forging new economic partnership that would ensure mutual growth, the U.S. decided to maintain exploitation of tens of millions of people and caused the death of hundreds of thousands in Congo alone. And this wasn't new. Within its own borders, the U.S. had exterminated the black community of Tulsa, Oklahoma, because somehow the success of black people is seen as a threat to mainstream American society. And so, Lumumba, in their eyes, had to be killed. A sacrifice that would keep the seven-headed beast alive. A monster who, instead of innovating around its dependencies, decides to reduce a whole region to poverty, malnutrition, disease, and death for 60 years and counting. A beast who, instead of finding allies with whom to grow, thrives by draining the life of the Africans and its descendants. And it masks its deeds by trying to claim that the black man and the black woman are not worthy of civilization, let alone progress.
Many people were killed in the Lumumba's rebellions in 1964 to 1967, but some people number it in the hundreds of thousands.
After Lumumba's death, the country fell into civil unrest, where countless Africans died. The irony of irony is that following the assassination of Lumumba, Western powers put in place and maintained Mobutu Sese Seko, a brutal dictator who essentially bankrupted the Congo. All this under the watchful eye and support of those who claim to have the mandate of spreading democracy in the world. Lumumba wasn't the only African leader of a resource-rich country that was calling for African unification and that wanted to use its natural resources to better its people.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed videos. We came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? No, oh, I'm sure it did.
48 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest in Africa, free healthcare, free education, highest GDP per capita in Africa.
Gaddafi. What at first appears to be a spontaneous uprising is in reality the culmination of a carefully managed, top-secret, 30-year-old CIA operation.
Greatest man-made river in the world that was bringing fresh water to 70% of all Libyans, all of it self-funded. That was the Libya of Gaddafi.
What few people know as the rebellion against Gaddafi unfolds is that the man leading the uprising is in fact a long-time CIA contact.
Not as the West portrayed him, not a mindless brute dictator, but a visionary. He called for Africa to have its own currency backed by gold, a single currency for the whole continent. If we think about it, this would have made Africa one of the foremost economic blocs in the world, overnight. This was the move that caused the West to assassinate him, a coalition of U.S. and European countries. This proposal to move to a single currency was, and still is, overwhelmingly supported by all Africans. The continent has over 40% of world gold reserves and a gargantuan amount of unmined gold. A gold-backed currency would eliminate reliance on Western financial systems like the IMF or World Bank, reducing external debt. Currently, Africa owes over $700 billion in external debt, often tied to fluctuating foreign currencies. With a single currency, Africa's combined GDP, currently around $3 trillion, and population of 1.4 billion, would form a vast, interconnected market. This would rival economic blocs like the EU and strengthen Africa's negotiating power in global trade. But above all, by eliminating reliance on foreign financial systems like the IMF or World Bank, a strong, stable currency would enable Africa to finance its industrial projects without begging foreign interests or getting interest-crippling loans with conditions that are designed to keep Africa poor. In 1969, under the monarchy of King Idris, Libya, despite its newly discovered oil reserves, was largely under the influence of Western oil companies. profits were siphoned off to foreign entities, while many Libyans lived in poverty or lacked adequate infrastructure. Education, healthcare, and basic services were scarce, and political participation for the average citizen was minimal. When Gaddafi and his fellow young officers orchestrated the bloodless coup in 1969, they justified their action as liberating Libya from the grip of foreign powers. Gaddafi quickly consolidated power, declaring Libya a Jamahiriya, or a state of the masses, intending to put the nation's vast oil wealth to work for ordinary citizens. Through various social programs, he channeled resources into free healthcare, free education, housing subsidies, and other benefits that significantly raised the Libyan standard of living, making the country one of Africa's most prosperous at the time. In the 1970s, Gaddafi began laying out his broader ideological vision in his famous Green Book, advocating for direct popular governance, economic socialism, and Arab-African solidarity. He also saw the potential for Libya's oil wealth to be used in support of African liberation movements, lending financial and diplomatic backing to anti-colonial struggles across the continent. His stance put him at odds with Western governments, who saw his influence as a threat to their strategic and economic interests. This is where we must remember that true capitalist interests are not threatened by competition. On the contrary, it thrives on it. Because competition causes what causes the quality of goods to increase, causes innovation to bring new services and goods, and prices to decrease. But in a predatory capitalist system, corruption is used to avoid competition, and aggression is also used. You will recognize its symptoms in illogical slogans of foreign wars to defend the country, and where young men are sent to defend the interest of a non-competitive corporation. By the 1990s and early 2000s, Gaddafi's vision for a United States of Africa grew bolder. He proposed an African central bank, an African army, and a single currency for the entire continent. The idea of an African gold-backed currency, in particular, alarmed Western powers, who feared losing control over a financial system deeply rooted in the US dollar. Much like Patrice Lumumba decades earlier, Gaddafi believed that African resources, from oil to precious metals, should first and foremost be used to uplift the people of Africa. As a founding force behind the African Union, AU, Gaddafi urged fellow heads of state to create institutions that could defend African sovereignty. His push often clashed with Western interests that relied on Africa as a steady source of vital minerals and fossil fuels. Though Gaddafi's methods and rhetoric were questioned by many, the core of his argument resonated with other African leaders. Africa's wealth in African hands for African development. Put in this context, it is easy to understand why the hand of the Western capitalist system tried multiple times to eliminate Gaddafi. The U.S. and allied countries reportedly supported covert operations to eliminate Gaddafi, particularly during the 1980s. One notable example was the 1986 bombing of Tripoli and Benghazi, Operation El Dorado Canyon, following allegations of Libyan involvement in terrorism. While not explicitly an assassination attempt, it targeted Gaddafi's compound, narrowly missing him but killing several others, including his adopted daughter. Various Libyan factions, often funded by Western powers, plotted against him. Some were suppressed before execution due to Gaddafi's pervasive intelligence network. Well before the 2011 civil war that destroyed Libya, Western leaders were already talking about removing Gaddafi. And this came right after Gaddafi started to push for a single African currency. And for this, they used the whole might of the colonial capitalist machine, even though Gaddafi was making serious efforts to open up to the international community. Case in point? Well, the very person that plotted to get him killed received untold millions from Gaddafi to get him elected.
Well, on the very day that Muammar Gaddafi was killed, then French President Nicolas Sarkozy said that his death would mark the start of a new democratic process in Libya. But just months prior to that, Sarkozy had allegedly accepted illegal campaign money from the late Libyan dictator, and this in order to finance his 2007 presidential run. And it was no small sum. It said that he obtained some 50 million euros from Gaddafi, and this in exchange for a pledge to help the Libyan leader rehabilitate his international image.
Multiple reports allege collaboration between international intelligence agencies like Mossad, MI6, and Libyan opposition to plan his assassination, though many of these plots failed or were unsubstantiated. Yet international tensions followed him throughout his rule. In the 1980s, the United States imposed sanctions on Libya, accusing Gaddafi of sponsoring terrorism. NATO's repeated confrontations with Libya further exacerbated hostilities, culminating in the 2011 intervention during the Arab Spring uprisings. Western media justified the campaign by portraying Gaddafi as a brutal dictator suppressing his own people. In reality, the conflict was also a struggle over the redistribution of Libya's oil wealth and Gaddafi's calls for an Africa less dependent on Western corporations and financial systems. WikiLeaks released a trove of emails from Hillary Clinton's private server during her tenure as U.S. Secretary of State, shedding light on the 2011 Libyan intervention. These emails reveal that Clinton was a pivotal advocate for U.S. involvement in Libya, aiming to support the NATO-led mission to protect civilians during the civil war. In correspondence with her advisor, Sidney Blumenthal, discussions highlighted France's interests in Libya, including access to oil and concerns over Gaddafi's gold reserves, potentially undermining the French franc in Africa. Multiple reports allege collaboration between international intelligence agencies like Mossad, MI6, and Libyan opposition to plan his assassination, though many of these plots failed or were unsubstantiated. Yet international tensions followed him throughout his rule. In the 1980s, the United States imposed sanctions on Libya, accusing Gaddafi of sponsoring terrorism. NATO's repeated confrontations with Libya further exacerbated hostilities, culminating in the 2011 intervention during the Arab Spring uprisings. Western media justified the campaign by portraying Gaddafi as a brutal dictator suppressing his own people. In reality, the conflict was also a struggle over the redistribution of Libya's oil wealth and Gaddafi's calls for an Africa less dependent on Western corporations and financial systems. WikiLeaks released a trove of emails from Hillary Clinton's private server during her tenure as U.S. Secretary of State, shedding light on the 2011 Libyan intervention. These emails reveal that Clinton was a pivotal advocate for U.S. involvement in Libya, aiming to support the NATO-led mission to protect civilians during the civil war. In correspondence with her advisor, Sidney Blumenthal, discussions highlighted France's interests in Libya, including access to oil and concerns over Gaddafi's gold reserves, potentially undermining the French franc in Africa. One notable email from March 2011 details French President Nicolas Sarkozy's motivations, citing a desire for increased access to Libyan oil and a strategic move to assert French military power. Clinton's active role in the intervention is further evidenced by her efforts in coalition building and diplomatic negotiations, as seen in various communications throughout the conflict. Gaddafi's capture and killing in October 2011 marked the end of his 4-decade rule. In the aftermath, Libya descended into chaos, with rival factions vying for power, leading to a humanitarian and political crisis still unresolved. Once one of Africa's wealthiest nations, post-Gaddafi Libya became plagued by insecurity, human trafficking, and internal conflicts. I hope by now you see the pattern. Africans want to help their people, but the West, who touts a free market approach to world economy, has in fact undermined it. This pattern of behavior goes back centuries, and wherever it could, the seven-headed beast exerted its lack of humanity by completely destroying successful Black and African countries and communities if it meant getting a few more dollars. In many ways, we owe our modern independence movement to a small island who stood against the beast, freed its people, and because of who they were, they are still paying the price till this day. Their independence movement was started by a very unlikely figure, a military genius who applied his skills to change history.
There's one great New World rebel many have forgotten. He was a nobody who became a somebody only after 50 years of obscurity. who wound up leading the only successful large-scale slave revolt in history. The general who made Haiti the second free colony in the whole of the Americas. His name was Toussaint Louverture, aka the Black Napoleon. Kept on rising until he became ruler of the society that had enslaved him, an enlightened thinker, a prescient philosopher, and a brilliant general. Louverture was also a man who dared to dream of freedom even if he wouldn't live.
When he defeated France, the United States, and Spain to free Haiti, Toussaint Louverture did so after spending his life learning how to read and write under an oppressive French colonial regime. He proved himself to be a shrewd military strategist. He managed to organize the Haitian revolt into a well-coordinated and disciplined force, which triumphed over better-equipped colonial armies. His dream was for the Haitian people to be free and to have the opportunity for their labor to profit their own communities. However, because they had lost control of the island, the French and Americans burned down the lucrative plantations to prevent the Haitians from benefiting. They also imposed an embargo on the island. If anything qualifies as a crime against humanity, it is the embargo of an island nation. Continuing this policy to the present day has resulted in countless lost lives among Haiti's black population. These casualties are not as publicized as those in other global conflicts, but one must wonder why every effort Haiti makes to flourish economically has been thwarted by the West. I can already hear the argument of those who have bought into the narrative that Haiti is poor because their people are incapable of being economically successful. To them, I will share the following. The United States occupied Haiti from 1915 to 1934, officially citing concerns over political instability and foreign influence, but the primary motivations were to protect U.S. economic interests and assert dominance in the Caribbean. During the occupation, the U.S. implemented exploitative policies that disrupted Haitian society and economy. One such policy was the corvée system, which used forced labor to build infrastructure like roads, not for the benefit of Haitians, but to facilitate U.S. economic and military control. Additionally, land redistribution policies allowed wealthy U.S. and Haitian elites to acquire vast tracts of land, displacing small-scale farmers who had relied on subsistence agriculture to survive. We see here again the hand of the Western-style capitalist, robbing the industry of the people for the profit-making of those who do not care about the society itself and its progress. Haiti was once largely self-sufficient in rice production, a key staple in its diet, until U.S. policies and multinational interests deliberately undermined its agricultural sector in the 1980s and 1990s. Under pressure from the IMF and World Bank, Haiti was forced to adopt structural adjustment programs, SAPs, that required slashing tariffs on imports, including rice, from 35% to just 3%. This opened the Haitian market to heavily subsidized U.S. rice, known locally as Miami rice, which was sold at prices so low that local farmers could not compete. Multinational agribusinesses in the U.S., such as Cargill, profited enormously from this arrangement, while Haitian agriculture collapsed, leaving rural farmers impoverished and unable to sustain their livelihoods. What Black and African nations need are true free market systems, supported by governance structures that enable self-determination and growth. This is why we are witnessing a new wave of independence movements in Africa, with leaders like Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso and Assimi Goïta of Mali, expelling French interests and rapidly transforming their nations. These leaders have shifted their countries from dependency to becoming some of the fastest-growing economies in Africa and among the fastest in the world. This represents a true realization of the dream envisioned by Malcolm X and Thomas Sankara, where the nations of Amun and Ra can once again thrive. It is an opportunity to break free from the legacy of setbacks, such as the drying up of the Sahara, a tragedy that led to the collapse of African civilizations and forced its people to start over within the continent. If you like this type of videos,
here by a special guest today, as we are just getting our first snow, maybe our only snow of the year here in Texas. And so somebody is being a bit more clingy than normal because they are not used to all of the white stuff on the ground outside and all of the cold air that we're getting. I know for plenty of you watching this video, you're like, yeah, Texas it's nothing compared to so many other places in the world. But for us, it's cold and it is winter here. So we just wrapped up an interview with our kind of friend of the show, Mark Sloboda, right? He's a regular guest who comes on here. And we got into all of the latest when it comes to this pivot that the mainstream media is currently doing as they are trying to figure out how to reframe the Biden administration and their accomplishments, or really lack thereof, over in Ukraine. And we also talked about the situation on the battlefield, right? Where things stand and why we're likely seeing Russia in a position where they're saying, hey, we can have talks, but we need to acknowledge the situation, the reality of the situation on the ground. Is Trump willing to do that? Or is he stuck in some fantasy land where he thinks that Putin is destroying Russia and that there are 1 million dead Russians? Well, we discussed all of that and more earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sloboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that we have a new president here in the US, or I guess not necessarily new, but he's back again. But before I get into everything Trump related, I actually want to talk about this new Time magazine, right? Have you been hanging out with Eric Trump? And apparently also Elon Musk. It's interesting because I had forgotten after 4 years of, oh, this is what the Trump administration is like, right? That every day is a different, a new and different emergency, chaos, whatever it is that the media is so obsessed with. But
Did you hear the new presidential tune they were playing as he was inaugurated?
I did not. What was that one? I'm surprised CNN didn't add that in. Maybe they could have added it quietly into the background. They're like, well, that's just part of it.
Maybe that's just what I was hearing in my head.
Right. I think you're not the only one there. Well, while we did get that, we also got the end of the Biden administration, right? We have to recognize the end of everything that Biden has given to this world. And you had Time Magazine's Simon Schuster with a new article titled "Why Biden's Ukraine Win Was Zelensky's Loss," in which he notes that when it came to the Biden administration's response to the conflict in Ukraine and the 3 objectives it set, that Ukraine's victory was never among them. Instead, they just kept saying they would support Kiev for as long as it takes, even though we never really got what that meant. How do you view this piece and what it says about the Biden administration's legacy in Ukraine, where obviously now any kind of victory for Kiev is nowhere to be found?
Yeah, this is the equivalent of, Biden taking his last go home flight on Air Force One in the context that the United States has lost its proxy war come hot war, particularly in the last months of the Biden administration, on Russia. And in order to somehow try to salvage his legacy, loyal journalists are manning the air defense and throwing flak into the air as that last flight of Air Force One goes off. Suddenly, it's not about Ukraine's victory, right? Despite all the pronouncements of Russia must not win, Ukraine must, be victorious, and Biden himself going, that man cannot remain in power. Bye, Biden, you cannot remain in power, right? I mean, seriously, I don't know. It's like we're trying to just it's not so much whitewashing history. It's literally taking history out and putting a green screen behind it and projecting what they want onto it now. Suddenly, it's not about Ukraine's victory now that Russia is winning. This is something completely different from what we were hearing, certainly in the first 2 years of the conflict, when we were told that Russia's economy is rubble and the ruble is worth nothing, and the entire country was about to collapse. Although you've still got your holdouts who are still promising that that's going to happen any day now. But they've been saying the same thing for the last 3 years. So I can't take this piece very seriously. This was not going to be a success story ultimately. Okay, that's revisionism. The most important objective was for Ukraine to survive as a sovereign democratic country, free to pursue integration with the West. Well, I'm pretty sure that Ukraine lost its sovereignty when its government was overthrown in an openly U.S. and Western-backed putsch in 2014. So the sovereign issue, I mean, the country literally entirely depends on economic and foreign aid and military aid from the West. So how can we call that sovereign? I mean, I don't understand that. They literally dictate what happens in the country. Democratic, please, right? I mean, this is what they've been saying all along. How many political parties have been banned since the Maidan regime seized power in 2014? 21? More than that? Certainly every single party representing the interests of the people of East Ukraine, every leftist party in the country, and even a lot of other parties who just at some point didn't agree with the Maidan consensus. And as for the Maidan parties, even Poroshenko, the former president and leader of the European Solidarity Party, just another flavor, right? There's absolutely zero difference between the policies of Poroshenko's European Solidarity Party and Zelensky's Servant of the People Party. It's just which corrupt group of Maidan plutocrats is in control of it. But Poroshenko was arrested for treason by Zelensky. He was charged with treason. Now the West made that all just quietly go away and everything, but I mean, the leader of the largest opposition party in the country, which had just before that threatened to become the largest party in the country, the opposition bloc, Viktor Medvedchuk, was arrested, charged with treason, and then traded to Russia in a prisoner of war deal because he was the leader of the political opposition in the country. All critical media in the country has literally been shut down under a unified information policy. And this was before the Russian intervention in 2022. All the media of East Ukraine had already been shut down for a year. The largest church in the country, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, is literally undergoing a pogrom and is one writ away from being openly banned. Its churches are being seized, its priests thrown in prison because the church is not 100% politically loyal, at least in the minds of Zelensky, to his regime. Right? So freedom, no political freedom, no religious freedom, no press freedom, but democracy. Okay, all right. I mean, this is Orwellian. It's a sick, obscene caricature to refer to this country as a democracy. So what are we left then? Not sovereign, not democrat, free to associate with the West, which means join NATO, of course, which is really the crux of the matter. But if the point was just for Ukraine to survive, then why didn't they just fulfill the Minsk Accords?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why did they go to war to begin with? Why didn't they just fulfill? Right? That would have left a quote, at least in their terms, sovereign democratic Ukraine free to associate with the West. What about the Istanbul Communique? Why didn't they sign off on a peace deal in the first months of the conflict? Oh, maybe because they actually believed that the Kiev regime could win and that Russia would collapse, and that the economic damage they were dreaming of doing with their sanctions war would drive Russia, Putin out of power and possibly even split up the country. Biden is leaving revisionism to try to airbrush his legacy as he leaves this stinking pile of blood and feces on Donald Trump's doorstep.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you're talking about them even wanting to join NATO, they didn't even get that, right? It's like, what have they actually gotten? Nothing at the end of the day, other than, all of these Ukrainians
who have NATO weapons and military help.
Yeah. And this idea that, it was just about helping Ukraine to survive. Okay, well, then why did you pick a fight with Russia in the first place, right? Why did you continue to target all of the people in the Donbass region who said, hey, we don't want anything to do with this Western-backed regime, yet they continue to attack them when you literally have Russia sitting there saying, hey, follow the Minsk Accords, right? Follow the agreements we had and everything will be fine. And they chose not to do that. Now, when it comes to where things stand on the battlefield, right? We had this transition here in the U.S. You have a new administration coming in under Trump. He's campaigned on ending the war in Ukraine. He's yet to say how he really plans to do that, even though, we even heard from Russian President Putin this week. He's making it very clear these are our demands, right? We want a lasting peace. If there's going to be an agreement, we're not going to do any of this short-term truce nonsense. So when it comes to where things stand on the battlefield, we have, I know they're your favorite institute, so much so that you've renamed them. Let me see if I can get it right. It's the Newland Kagan Institute for the Dissemination of War Propaganda. Did I get it?
You win a golden star.
I didn't even have that written down. All right, so they came out with a new report in which they said that Russian forces have formed a strike group, including units from the 2nd and 41st Combined Arms Armies south of Pokrovsk in the Donbass, likely signaling plans to intensify offensive south and southwest of the city. Okay.
Wow, they actually said something true and accurate.
That was going to be my question. Did they get it right? What are you keeping an eye on when it comes to the situation in the battlefield right now? And how are things looking in terms of, if you're Trump and his team coming in and you're looking over at the Donbass, what are they seeing right now?
Yeah, this is a really bizarre report from the Institute for the Newland Kagan Institute for the Dissemination of War Propaganda. The Institute for the Study of War. They make it out to be that because the 2nd Combined Arms Army from the Karahava direction is moving up into Pokrovsk, that is something unusual and strange, while they're still in absolute denial that Karahava has already fallen and completely fallen. And so, of course, they're going to move this up because Pokrovsk is the last significant urban area in southern Donbass. It's this last supply and logistics center. Velika Novosilka is completely encircled, where, they could move these troops into the Dnepropetrovsk region if they want, right? But they're not there yet. So, of course, they're going to finish up Pokrovsk. It's not like it's a surprise. And then the Institute for the Study of War finishes up. It's not clear if Karahava has been fully taken yet. Right? Our Combined Arms Army is moving on to the next target, right? But because the Kiev regime hasn't acknowledged that Karahava has fallen yet, they're trying to ignore it. Toretsk has fallen. Chasiv Yar is now very close to falling. All of this is coming together, and so when these centers, these fortifications are fully taken, and the Kiev regime has fewer defensive positions left, obviously that Russia can combine those forces together to finish the deal in the South Donbass, and that is all they're doing right now. And right now, Pokrovsk is seriously facing actual encirclement. Right, not operational, but actual encirclement, and it is going to be a very bad situation for them. Just like they're experiencing a very bad situation being encircled in much of Velika Novosilka, this fortified area that is in the South Donbass that is also being finished up right now. So I think that we can't talk anymore about Ukraine's operational crisis in the South Donbass. We can talk about the utter catastrophe and collapse of their position in the South Donbass, right? We're a couple months maybe away from that's it. That's all she wrote. And then on to the last defensive line in the Donbass, the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka line. And in one point, right, the forces from Toretsk are already moving up towards Konstantinovka. So that is already a thing. And there has also been big Russian breakthroughs to the north of that defensive line. In the South Kharkov region, in the Kupiansk direction, where Russian forces are basically the third battle for Liman has already begun. And it does not seem that the Kiev regime is really able to offer much resistance in that direction either. So, I mean, there is no ray of hope, no silver lining of the storm clouds gathered. Everything is bad and getting worse for the Kiev regime, and everything is accelerating for the Russian offensive. Right? It's still bloody and hard, and there's a cost, and it's a grind, but the grind is much faster than it ever was before.
Yeah, and it's interesting the timing, right? We find ourselves in this place right now where you've got Russia saying, hey, sure, we'll talk, but pay attention to what's going on the battlefield, right? Look at the reality of this situation.
That reality is something that they don't want to acknowledge.
Yeah, that I can tell, especially because, and I wonder sometimes how much Trump really knows, how much the people around him are really telling him, because
evidently Trump thinks that Spain is part of BRICS and is about to launch 100% tariffs on Spain. So
yeah, I think he's got some catching up to do. He hasn't been, well, maybe he's taken a break for the last few years.
And maybe he knows something we don't. Maybe Spain is about to join BRICS. I don't know. But there was, he made comments, Trump made comments that he believes that there are 1 million Russian dead, quoting numbers. We have numbers, he said. Yeah, that's the Kiev regime's propaganda, right? And he believes that the Ukrainian regime has suffered less casualties than that. I don't know whether he actually believes that or not, but that is what he repeated publicly. And he also talked that the conflict that Putin is destroying Russia, and that inflation is out of control, and Putin must want a deal because it's not going very well for him. He said that most people thought it would be finished up for a week, and it's been 3 years. Well, that's because the United States and all of NATO joined in a proxy war on Russia, and it took Russia 3 years to chew through not just the Kiev regime, but all of NATO's warehouses and stocks and their non-boot on the ground special forces and everything else that was thrown at Russia for the last 3 years. So there's inflation in Russia, right? Part of that actual inflation, though, is because the real salaries are increasing so fast, right? Along with everything, the central bank is concerned that things are getting a little too hot and has really raised interest rates in an attempt to actually lower growth. They want to lower growth, right? But there's inflation in the United States, there's inflation in Europe, and you need to keep all those things in context. It's a bit high. It's higher than the government went long, which is why they're taking, but it's nothing critical. It's nothing that's going to be this this black swan moment where that some people have been praying for 3 years, where the Russian economy suddenly collapses. And as to Russia being destroyed, so during the last 3 years, Russia, for the first time, became one of the high income countries of the world, right? Where the average person is considered a high income country. And Russia, in terms of GDP per purchasing power parity, the only real way to compare countries, jumped both Japan and Germany, well, Germany and then Japan, in the last couple of years. And the Russian economy is growing faster than the American economy. But, it's destroying Russia, according to Trump. So obviously, Putin has got some educating. Either this is just he's now buying into the propaganda of the previous regime, or he's got a short, sharp shock and education underway of how bad the U.S. position is right now and how little leverage he has to try to force his deal onto Russia, to somehow achieve by his deal what they've failed to do to Russia in the last 3 years of the conflict. Russia's not going to buy into that. They said no Minsk threes, no ceasefires, none of that. We get all of our demands met or the war continues, which means the war continues, because there's no way that any U.S. president can agree to that. And Trump was joking with journalists today who asked him about solving, the conflict, and he says, "I've still got another half a day left." It's okay, right? Obviously joking, but I think at some point, the fact that he's no longer talking that he is going to solve it on the first day, that a little bit of sobering up. But I think he's got a lot more sobering up on this issue to do. If I were Trump, I would pivot to issues like, the domestic fights that he has already begun, or peace in the Middle East, which, to be fair, he's not going to solve peace in the Middle East, but he does have a lot more leverage over Netanyahu, and has, to some extent, apparently, whether it's the carrot or the stick, we don't know, been using it. Any ceasefire and exchange of hostages on both sides is an accomplishment, even if no one believes that the ceasefire is going to last much longer than that. But Trump had better concentrate on that, because he's not going to win any political victories by solving the conflict in Ukraine. This ends on Russia's terms, not on Trump's terms.
Yeah, and as you're laying it out there, it's making me think about the fact, comparing it to the deal in the Middle East. And, that deal in terms of a temporary ceasefire and a hostage exchange, we had the framework for that back in May 2024. The Biden administration could have forced Netanyahu to do the deal, and they didn't. And so I'm wondering, and I think my theory on this is that Netanyahu was waiting to see, first of all, who won the election. And second of all, when it was Trump, he basically said, okay, I'm going to act like I'm giving in on this, right? I'm going to give this to you right as you get into office. You can take credit for it. And now Netanyahu gets to act like he has leverage over Trump for the next 4 years. I think Trump thinks that Ukraine is going to be that easy, right? If he genuinely does believe that 1 million Russians have died and the Russian economy is being really seriously harmed by this, and that Russia is struggling, then he's looking at this going, okay, Putin is waiting for me to come in and for me to agree to a deal with him. And then Zelensky will just go along with it because, whatever, it's Zelensky. He doesn't really have any actual power anyway. I'm wondering if that's how he's actually looking at this. And yeah, he's going to be in for a wake-up call, because right now it's not as if Putin is just sitting around, waiting for Trump to call and waiting for them to have talks so that they can make a deal. No, he's talking to Chinese President Xi Jinping, and he's talking about, they're in a call in their regular New Year's conversation where they're talking about strengthening the alliance between Russia and China. Trump needs to be paying attention to that and to the message that is being sent, which is, hey, it's great that the US has a new president that claims that he doesn't want World War III, but that does not change where the world is now and how much change has occurred, especially in just the last 4 years. How do you view this situation when it comes to the realities hitting the NATO alliance, right? Seeing what they're seeing on the battlefield, finally, maybe, possibly admitting it, and then how much they're going to try to dig their heels in. I know the EU, especially when it comes to trying to prevent what's happening from happening any further.
Yeah. So first of all, let me just say that I don't think Netanyahu is going to be as easy as Netanyahu, as much less. I think I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm sure Netanyahu isn't done yet, right? I know the Israeli military is somewhat exhausted, and it's important for him politically to get the hostages out. But I don't think Netanyahu is done with this personally. So I don't think that's going to be even if I guess a temporary ceasefire, Trump can bask in the glory of a temporary ceasefire and a hostage exchange, but I wouldn't expect much more out of that. And like I said, some of that maybe he promised Netanyahu something. It may be the carrot instead of the stick. We don't know. We don't know what it was, so we'll have to wait and find out. As for Putin and the Chinese president Xi Jinping, they have traditionally a New Year's joint discussion, a communication. And it happens, they try to time it between the Russian New Year and the Chinese New Year. So that's the reason why it's a bit late for New Year's in the Western or the Russian sense. But and they did the Chinese president was quite firm up, and this was quite obviously in part an open message to the U.S. that you may think that you are going to woo Russia away from China. That may be part of some people's close to Trump's foreign policy, but that is not going to happen, right? And I particularly like this comment coming from Putin and Xi Jinping against standing together against external uncertainty based on preservation of stability and resilience against stress. Standing together against uncertainty. Well, what is more uncertain than Trump? I mean, that's exactly what they're talking about there, because no one has any idea, probably not even him, what he's going to do for the next 4 years. He's the chaos bomb going off. It's just the question of where it's going off. So against external uncertainty minus B, well, we're going to stand together against Trump, whatever he gets up to, more than likely. That's the way I read that anyway. So they promised more increased military support. That they look on wrapping up some new pipelines. And they promised to support each other politically in the United Nations as well, and looking for increased trade. So, the West is still in denial about the strength of the Russian-Chinese alliance, because I even if they don't want to say the word, I think we can be pretty clear about what that is now, and they're still in denial about it. But Trump is basically coming into office and just trying to declare a new world where this is the golden age of America, and Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal belong to the United States, and the Gulf of Mexico is now called the Gulf of America, and the golden age is upon us, and he's the God Emperor of the world. As if simply by saying all of these things he can make them true. Well, he can't. And for once, we will actually, of course, see a Western media that, while not as vitriolic against Trump as he was during his first administration, they most certainly will not be that. They will be openly critical of him. In a way that they have not been of the Biden administration, of course, for the last 4 years because of, liberal political loyalties.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how the media coverage. I mean, even just going back to that article from Time Magazine, if they're already rewriting the Biden administration, rewriting their quote unquote goals, it's like, oh, it's going to be an interesting 4 years when it comes to how much pressure they now put on Trump, whether that's to support Ukraine, to figure out Ukraine, whatever that may be. But I'm very curious to see what his first meeting with Putin looks like, because I think that that's going to be very telling, and he's in for a bit of a wake-up call. Certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me.
Dr. Fauci may not be off the hook for his crimes after all. So we've got some bombshell news to get to here in a minute. But first, remember when Joe Biden said his administration would not be involved in any preemptive pardons for potential criminals in his administration? Watch.
President Trump is reportedly considering a wave of preemptive pardons. Does this concern you? All these preemptive pardons?
Well, it concerns me in terms of what kind of precedent it sets and how the rest of the world looks at us as a nation of laws and justice. You're not going to see in our administration that kind of approach to pardons. Nor are you going to see in our administration the approach to making policy by tweets. It's just going to be a totally different way in which we approach the justice system.
Yeah, of course it is. Well, of course, we now know that was a bald-faced lie.
And let's
Sunday
set
night,
aside the policy by tweets that he did all weekend. We don't even have time for that.
right? Yeah, just the policy by tweets thing is like a sideshow to this whole thing. But yes, the preemptive pardons, absolutely, and something that Trump actually didn't do. So it's kind of funny how that's all unfolded, right? So Sunday night, in a jaw-dropping move, President Joe Biden pardoned Dr. Anthony Fauci, of course, just hours before leaving office. The man who became the face of America's pandemic response now has a blanket pardon, and it goes back years, back to 2014. It's not just for anything recent. Of course, the pardon goes all the way back and covers basically to shield him from any federal charges tied to gain-of-function research and government involvement in the origins of COVID-19. Like, that is the predicate. That's exactly what this pardon is all about. But here's the big kick to the nuts for Fauci. The pardon might not actually save him at all. In fact, according to our friend Paul Thacker, excellent journalist Paul Thacker, just laid out how Fauci could still be brought to justice. Let's break this down. First of all, a presidential pardon only protects you from federal crimes, of course, so states can go after you. A number of states have an appetite to go after Fauci, including Florida specifically. And with Republican lawmakers controlling Congress, Fauci's not off the hook when it comes to investigations. Senator Rand Paul, who's made it his mission to expose Fauci, is already calling foul on this, says he says that that's because Fauci lied under oath, perjuring himself. And that perjury charge won't keep Fauci out of legal hot water. Specifically, here is Senator Paul explaining how Fauci lied and covered it up.
Well, our investigation has confirmed that he did indeed lie. He committed a felony. He said that they did not fund, that the NIH did not fund gain-of-function, dangerous research in China. We now know that to be untrue. We know he committed a felony. But what we've discovered now is that there was a massive cover-up from the very beginning. There was a behind-the-scenes effort to change the opinion of people. Many of the Fauci colleagues all believed that the virus did come from the lab. Their opinions were all changed, but then all evidence was then covered up. They began using burner phones. They began using couriers. They said, we can't do things electronically. I can take things by hand to his house. It sounds more like the CIA than the NIH.
So as Thacker explains, even with the pardon, he can still be dragged into congressional hearings. If he's caught lying again, it could basically spark new legal battles as a result. And let's not forget state level prosecutions here. Those are very much still on the table for Dr. Fauci. The pardon only addresses COVID-related offenses. Doesn't have anything to do with perjury. It doesn't cover the congressional perjury piece of this, lying before Congress. As Thacker says in his piece, these pardons will not stop Department of Justice investigations, said one advisor to the Trump transition team who spoke on the condition of anonymity. We expected this and look at it as a predicate to get truth from people who can no longer use the Fifth Amendment. Now we can bring every one of them in front of a grand jury.
They can't use
that's the reason that preemptive pardons have not been tested, because a pardon is usually for a specific offense, known and convicted,
and
that somebody has already served the sentence for. They're saying this is wiped from your record, or this you can no longer be prosecuted for. It's not meant to be some sort of like invisibility cloak.
Right. And of course, this doesn't absolve him of any civil liabilities as well. But it gets worse. So that's on the Fauci side of this, but it gets worse now for the Biden crime family. Yesterday, right before Trump's speech, President Biden issued pardons for his whole family for past crimes, potential past crimes that could be prosecuted in the future. Again, going back to 2014 and all sorts of shady involvements in Ukraine and biolabs. Who the hell knows, right? But a stunning new development has emerged today. New revelations revealed today from James Comer on the House Oversight Committee shows that they have uncovered bank accounts linking the Bidens to millions of dollars in now suspicious funds from China, Romania, and Russia, funds that trace back to Joe Biden's tenure as vice president. One of the bombshell findings, a staggering $240,000 in direct wire transfers to Biden himself, with absolutely no explanation for what the money was for.
Wait, this
or
is
why
new
it was
today?
Yes, and why it was sent. Watch.
Where does this investigation stand?
Well, hopefully we're in the final stages. This morning, I issued a subpoena for targeted financial information from a certain financial institution related to Jim Biden, Sarah Biden, and Hunter Biden. This is a result of many of the documents that Devin Archer turned over. Remember, we subpoenaed and he turned over 3.7 million documents that never before been seen by any of the IRS investigators, the Securities and Exchange investigators, or any of the different groups that have been investigating the Bidens for years and years and years. And we've been able to connect some dots, we believe, that will finally answer pretty much every question we've had about the source of these shady transactions that went into the Biden family members, and what role exactly Joe Biden played in that role in his family's shady business dealings.
So you've sent out the subpoena this morning to a major bank?
Yes, that is correct.
And what specifically do you want to know from this bank in terms of these documents that you're looking for to connect those dots?
We believe we found new accounts. And remember, the number of bank accounts that we've discovered over the past year and a half since I've had subpoena power, since the Republicans flipped the House, is unbelievable. I mean, I don't think you would find very many people that have billion-dollar net worth that have as many different bank accounts as this Biden family had. Many of these were shell companies, as you and I have discussed, Maria, companies that sole purpose was to launder the money that the Bidens were receiving from China, from Romania, from Russia, and never one time through the course of this entire investigation, even during the depositions with Hunter Biden and the transcribed interview with Jim Biden, were they able to answer exactly what the family did to receive this money. So we believe we found some more accounts that will answer some more questions, and hopefully we can prepare to close this investigation and present our findings to the American people.
How many bank accounts are associated with Joe Biden?
I mean, Democrats don't care. You could have images of Joe Biden signing contracts in a pile of money that is Chinese yuan, and Democrats won't care. They don't care. They don't have standards.
No, it's amazing to see like the liberals online. I mean, there's some crazy liberals, on X, and it's just, I enjoy watching them, but they are so delusional and so out of touch. You could have them, as you point out, sitting in a pile of money that they received illegally, and they just are willfully ignorant about it. They totally don't want to see
It could literally be like Joe Biden is signing something to send your own child to war, surrounded by Chinese yuan and Democrats. So it could be your own name, and they won't care. But really, it's selling all of us down the river because they were peddling influence for things that were not in American interest.
So the big question, of course, incoming AG Pam Bondi was asked about these questions just the other day. You know, would she go after individuals? And she said she'd look at these on an individual case-by-case basis. So it'll be interesting to see if she goes after these crimes further, what sort of subpoenas will bring, how will all of this play out now that there are these pardons there, as Glenn Greenwald, as someone in our chat just pointed out here, Glenn Greenwald pointed out the other day that these pardons are only effective if you admit guilt. So that's an interesting way to look at it, right? You can't actually use the pardon unless you're actually admitting guilt. So James Biden, how his involvement in this, Hunter Biden's admissions here, where will that come? So many questions. Exactly who funneled this money? What strings were attached to this money? I'd like to know that. Most importantly, what promises were made in return for this money? Well, here's $240,000 wired directly to Joe Biden. What do we get in return for that? So many questions we still don't have answers to.
Okay, and two lingering questions that is a thought exercise we cannot possibly address in one show. Does it matter now that Democrats are out of power? And would the new Trump executive order against the weaponization of the federal government, would it apply here? Is he sort of saying, let's let bygones be bygones. Let's move forward. We're not going to go after any political enemies. Is that something that is in our best interest?
I don't know. That's a hard one because the president has so much work to do, which you're about to get to here in a second with all of these executive orders and everything else. How much do you want to, you ever heard the phrase, what is it? You never want to be tripping over pennies to pick up dimes, right? You don't want to be focused on picking up pennies off the ground when you could be focused on actually getting work done and making dimes.
Right.
So how much of your time and attention and effort in Congress do you want devoted to going after these people?
If it means that people can't do this, I want that.
Right.
Yeah, you
should
should not be able to get away with this, and people should understand the deterrent. That's one. Also, it's worth calculating how much money has been of our own taxpayer money has been attributed to prosecuting the Trumps for Deutsche Bank loans that had no victim, for accounting errors that Hillary Clinton had also done, for the Trump hush money, the Stormy Daniel hush money, for Russiagate. So we have already spent so much money. That's not to justify that more should happen if there were actual crimes, but we need to have the shared value of equal justice under the law. So it's incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah, and apparently, according to reports, James Comer has now announced that they are referring Hunter and James Biden for criminal prosecution. All right, we'll see. We'll see what Congress does here, but we'll follow this story for you over the next 10 days.
Well, the House Oversight Committee posted the pardon on X with just the terms Biden crime family. That doesn't tell us what they're going to do about it, what they can do about it, but it's just that they've got eyes on it. Okay, again, we should remember that Congress doesn't have the power to prosecute.
Right. All right, well, let's talk about executive orders, shall we?
All right, yes, let's just go down the list, guys, because President Trump on day one signed more than, here are the numbers, 200 executive actions, 46 executive orders, 115 personnel actions. He gave 3 speeches, went to 3 balls, spoke at length with reporters for more than 60 minutes in the Oval Office. You can read the full transcript, or hopefully you were with us when it was happening here on Redacted. So it was a marathon day one. I remind you, he's 78 years old. I'm 46, and I fell asleep before it was all over. But he went the distance. Also, it's worth reminding you that Joe Biden was 78 when he took office in this last term as well in 2021. But we see really a tale of 2 stories of aging here. The president also rescinded 78 Biden-era executive orders. Here is some of the more notable ones that felt like a wish list for people who may have voted for him or supported him or at least voted against Democrats. Let's see. He designated international cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. I was listening to Democrats on MSNBC say, well, we can't have that. We don't like drug cartels and crime. We do want to protect the people against it. But we can't start a war with Mexico. That's why we're against this. That's the only reason Democrats are speaking out against this, because they acknowledge drug cartels are in every single state. They are helping the fentanyl crisis move along. They are a bad thing, but we just don't like this terrorist organization designation because we don't want to start a war with Mexico. That's the only reason. That's not what President Trump said. What he said is that there is a declaration now of an emergency at the southern border, which then would allow us to close the border and take emergency action. He never said he wanted a war with Mexico, but here's how MSNBC covered that anyway.
A state of emergency is officially now in effect on the border. Does it feel like an emergency where you are standing?
Feels no different than 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago or an hour ago when we got here early this morning, Rachel.
Okay, so they're very condescending about this state of emergency, even though they know and we know that the Biden administration lost track of over 300,000 unaccompanied minors. That's not an emergency to them. 300,000 lost kids is not an emergency. Then I don't know how more they can prove to us that they are demonic.
Does everyone at MSNBC have to look like Rachel Maddow? Like, is that a prerequisite?
I used to work on MSNBC and I look like this.
Yeah, but you don't look like Rachel, but that's why they fired you.
How rude.
Because you're actually attractive. Anyway, yeah.
I left when I got pregnant with our third baby. If you recall, you were there.
Even SNL made fun of him this weekend. Chris
Okay.
Hayes looks like Rachel Maddow. This guy looks like Rachel Maddow. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. I'm just stunned by the side-by-side picture of these people.
Oh, they do look very much alike. I get
Yes.
what you're saying here.
Yes.
But can we circle back around to the fact that they don't care about children trafficked?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And that's not an emergency?
Last night I tweeted this. I said, you have to understand, under the Biden administration, the United States of America has become the largest purveyor of sex traffickers in the world. They have facilitated the sale, the use, and sexual assault of children at a rate we've never seen in world history before in the Biden administration, with the facilitation of the Department of Homeland Security under Mayorkas. It is disgusting. It is sick. I'm stunned also that liberals don't seem to care at all about it. They don't talk about it. They don't care about it. All of these children come across the border. They're drugged. They're brought over by coyotes, and they're not bloodline related to these people at all. Oh, is that your daughter that's laying there limp and drugged with a sticker on her that's going to be shipped off to some other family?
They are sent to addresses that are strip clubs.
Yes.
They are placed in homes with men that are not their family members. Anyone want to raise their hand and care about this? Secretary Mayorkas has been asked about this in Congress, and he said, I don't recall those reports of government prepared reports. Just wasn't that memorable to him.
Yeah,
wasn't.
doesn't care.
It haunts me, but it doesn't haunt them. Okay, so they're demonic. Okay, back to the laundry list of things that we're just pointing out to you, but you can find them yourself at whitehouse.gov. Let's see. President Trump enabled the military to participate in the defense of U.S. national borders. He paused all foreign aid for at least 90 days. Can we have a collective woot about that? Paused all foreign aid.
Except to Israel.
Except to Israel.
So they was going to carve out, except to Israel, which Israel, again, has a budget surplus and a space program. So they actually have money growing interest in a bank, billions. We have $36 trillion in debt in the United States, but we can cut off all foreign aid for 90 days. Except to Israel.
Where do you see that? Because it's not in the foreign aid.
It's because, in the way that the Trump administration says, it's because it's tied to treaties. It's not tied to just straight foreign aid. So they're blaming it on treaties, quote unquote treaties. That's why they can't pull back on the foreign aid to Israel, I guess, and Egypt also.
Also, didn't he lifted the moratorium on sending them medium range bombs? Didn't he?
Oh, I missed that actually. So
I didn't see that either.
Yeah, there's been so many pieces of news over the past 24 hours. But yeah, the Israel piece is definitely part of this. So they get a carve out, of course.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this when we covered the inauguration yesterday. In the post-inauguration parade, he brought up family members who are still missing their loved ones who are in captivity by Hamas. He gave not one single mention to the people who are still in captivity by the government of Israel, which we know is an order of magnitude of at least 1 to 30, because we saw 3 hostages released that were Israeli and 90 released that were Palestinian. Most of them were teenage boys, moms, and journalists. And so not one mention of the fact that both sides have prisoners. I found that incredibly troubling. Okay, there's the carve out of that. And we need to stay on top of that. We need to care about everybody equally, no matter what passport they have, no matter where they were born on their birth certificate. Okay. He ended all DEI programs within the federal government. He secured the right of the American people to engage in constitutionally protected speech. He prohibited the federal government from engaging or facilitating any conduct that would abridge speech. We'll see how much the federal government then adheres to that now, given that he was surrounded by most of the platforms that we use to exchange free speech by the oligarchs that we're calling them, right? Okay, he established that there are 2 sexes and that should be recognized on all federal agencies and all federal documents. I'm very curious if he will rescind passports that say X as your gender, because that has been an option since 2022. People who have self-identified on passports against their birth gender, will he then nullify those documents and send them a correct one? Very curious. He ended birthright citizenship to non-U.S. citizens, which will definitely be challenged in the courts. That means if 2 people who are not U.S. citizens have a baby on U.S. soil, they will not automatically make an American, as has been the case for generations, for decades, for centuries. So we'll see how the courts interpret the Constitution on that, because it is, in fact, in our Constitution. And he withdrew the United States from the World Health Organization. More on that bombshell in just a few minutes. And he signed an order forcing all federal workers to return to the office if they want to receive a paycheck. Here is conservative mama describing that order.
So I'm hearing that they're going to make us start coming to work, like going into work, like leaving home and going in. Like I'm going to have to get dressed and drive there. I'm gonna have to deal with traffic. I mean, the stress that this is gonna cause me. I'm not gonna be able to watch The View when it comes on. I'm gonna have to wait till I get home after work and watch it. And lunch. Do I have to pack a lunch now? I mean, come on. I may just quit. I think that's gonna be the only option, is just to quit.
So
you can do that if you want.
Conservative mama.
It's a real job.
I wonder how many people are going to quit, instead of going back to the office.
And do what? That would be a viable option under the Biden administration, because there were so many social handout programs where you didn't have to work, right? Yeah. But if those programs dry up, what? Then what?
Who
right?
knows?
So,
I mean,
okay.
And of course, we've seen, we talk about inflation. The inflation number, of course, is really, really troubling right now. And the numbers seem to indicate it's closer to 25 to 30% inflation in the United States. And they've been totally whitewashing this. And so, like the jobs that they created, almost all of the jobs were federal jobs or federal job adjacent in Washington, D.C. So all of these so-called jobs that Kamala Harris was talking about, federal jobs. Many of them can just stay home, work from home, and that is ending right now. Do you ever have a feeling you're being surveilled and hesitate to share things of interest via text message or email with your friends and loved ones? Well, recently, outspoken parents at a PTA meeting had initially said, I think J.D. Vance spoke out and said that those people would not be part January 6th, being at the Capitol on that day, in and around the Capitol, inside, outside. It was fairly broad, actually. it broad enough that it actually included people who were involved in fights with police, attacks on police. He was asked about this specifically during a speech, and he said, look, these people have been in prison for years now, and it's time. So, he had initially said, I think JD Vance spoke out and said that those people would not be part of this pardon. And it seems like that's not the case.
Yes, but we've had a former FBI agent and whistleblower, Stephen Friend, on the program saying that because the FBI violated the civil rights of so many of these defendants, they should forfeit all cases because it was their protocols that were violated. It should be that broad because they violated protocol. And I'm likely to agree with him on that. If the government didn't follow their own protocols for prosecuting these people, that's their fault, right? Then it really should be, they should forfeit these cases.
Well, and Kash Patel talked about this, right? That he, as a defender, right? I mean, he would go after these people. He would go after the government all the time, and he knew that they had screwed up, right? And this is a book that you and I both read specifically about this. But Kash Patel was like, when the government screws up, and they do it often, it's their fault. And they drop the ball routinely, and this is their fault.
Then you have to forfeit the case. You can't just go around violating civil rights. You can't do it. And so, I think most of us would like to see the more violent offenders continue to be prosecuted. But if they messed up, they messed up. Then that has to be the rights for all of us, because you would hope that if your civil rights were violated, then they would have to forfeit the case.
Well, and they also lied to us, as Mooks here in the chat says, entrapment. Yeah, they lied to us about how many FBI agents or informants or FBI informants were in the crowd that day, right? So you lied to us. You lied to the American people under oath in front of Congress, perjury, Christopher Wray. And now we know how many FBI agents were there agitating in the crowd.
Their internal documents admit lying to Congress, and they say, we don't know who prepared that document. That was not right. Sorry.
Not gonna work.
It does not work that way.
Yeah.
You have to be honest with us.
So there was some chicanery last night because President Trump issued these orders. It was a federal holiday, Martin Luther King Day, right? So he issues these orders, and he basically tells his staff, like, go deliver these right now. Get these people out of prison and jail right now. And they did. They tried their best. And but there were some people that were not being processed and let out last night. You had family members on the streets outside of these prisons waiting for their family members to be released. That wasn't going to happen in many cases. In fact, we now know at certain halfway houses where some of these defendants were living, at halfway houses, that a sheriff showed up to actually prevent them from leaving. So not everyone was following these orders. Here was the scene last night as they confronted these individuals trying to get them out of prison in the around midnight last night. Watch.
I'm giving you literally all I got. But no more are going to be released tonight, okay? And tomorrow is a brand new day. We'll see what tomorrow brings, okay? I'll probably be here with you. Okay?
Violation.
Don't release them violation of the law, right? No, I was told no more tonight.
No more tonight.
No more tonight. Okay?
We trust you.
And tomorrow, I don't know. Okay? And that's the best I got for you.
Can you tell us the condition of the prisoners?
Nope. I'm sure they're fine.
I'm sure they're fine.
Are you sure they're fine?
So we can't release them tonight, even though the president just signed an order. It's a federal holiday. I guess it's like a bank holiday. I guess everything's closed. We can't let these people out. Can you imagine? Your family members are like waiting outside. You had news people waiting outside to greet these individuals. So that wasn't the case for everyone, though. A number of people did get released last night. Though liberals on legacy media, though, just had a meltdown about this over Trump's decision to pardon January 6 protesters. Rachel Maddow specifically was saying that the pardoning of these individuals really it sends a signal to people who don't listen to Trump that, guess what? MAGA people are going to show up at your house and they're going to beat you up for not falling in line. Like that's
I don't understand.
Exactly. Watch her try to explain herself.
Aside from all of that, just blatant, open for business corruption, what we're seeing here with the January 6 pardons, this kind of thing does have the benefit of novelty, right? We've never quite seen something like this before. But like with the corruption, the boring thing about it is that we know exactly what this leads to. Authoritarian rulers all over the world have always liked to have paramilitary, loyal but unofficial perpetrators of violence and menace to work on their behalf, to intimidate and hurt anyone in opposition, to make it too scary for normal people to participate in politics or civic life, to make everybody who might oppose Trump in any way worry about the thugs that might turn up at their door. Trump pardoning and releasing from prison the January 6 defendants, including the paramilitaries, means he is effectively immunizing his followers from committing violence in his name.
I can't understand the logic.
So the people that showed up to protest peacefully that day, who had little constitutions in their pockets and who were upset about the result of the election and how it was handled in a number of different states, and then agitators who fired upon those protests, all of that. So those individuals who then took a bat, went after, grabbed a shield from a police officer, started some violence, cracked some windows, those people now are going to be coming to a city near you, is basically what she's saying. That if you don't fall in line with Trump's immigration policies or his anti-LGBTQ plus transgender executive orders or securing the border or ICE roundups in Colorado, that those people are going to come to your house and beat you over the head just like they did on January 6th. That's basically what she's saying.
She's saying she wants you to be afraid. I'm so confused. Because...
And I love she calls them paramilitary.
Oh, okay. That those people did have FBI agents breaking down their door. That she says she wants you to think that FBI agents will break down your door, so you are too afraid to participate. But that did happen to those people. So she's just saying it will happen to you, even though it happened. It did happen to them.
What she's saying is that those people there at the Capitol who committed violence and who stormed the Capitol and put their feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk, you better watch out, because now that those people are free,
for you.
They are coming for you.
But they were punished for participating in the political process.
Right. She forgets the fact that many of them have been in prison for 4 years. They've been tracked and monitored. They have to call their parole officer every day. They have ankle bracelets on. They can't travel. They literally get stuck on the TSA lines where they have to be monitored for 3 hours by TSA before they can fly. Like, they have been prosecuted. They have suffered for the last 4 years for putting their feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk.
Go ahead, Philip. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I think the implication is also that now that this is the precedent, if they do any violence in Trump's name, he'll just pardon them. And I think that's kind of the gist of what she's getting at, is that like now they can just commit violence at will.
Right.
So now they're unfettered.
And she said that there is now consequence-free, precedent set. I wonder if she just slept until noon and missed all the Biden pardons.
Yeah.
Because I'm very confused. Okay. All right. All right. Well, we'll leave that there. They can continue to make that logic, and you can swallow it if you want to. I'm not going to. Well, the World Health Organization did not take the breakup well. President Trump withdrew the United States from the WHO on Monday. Here's the statement that they posted on X, saying they regret this announcement. They further say they hope the United States will reconsider. I want you back, girl, is what they're saying. And we look forward to engaging in constructive dialogue to maintain the partnership between the USA and the WHO for the benefit of health and well-being of millions of people around the world. That's not who benefited from the WHO. In fact, it enriched the few. There are a few people who benefited from the WHO. Most likely it's not you, dear viewer. It was not me. When President Trump signed the withdrawal, he said this, and I found this really shocking, and I would like to know if it's true. He said the U.S. is overpaying for WHO membership. He said the U.S. has been paying $500 million, while China, with a far larger population, pays $39 million. He indicates that he had in his previous administration negotiated a $39 million membership during his first administration. And President Biden, knowing that, still stayed in the WHO and paid $500 million. Did President Biden know that we had been offered a discount gym membership here and just paid the premium with U.S. tax dollars anyway? Why? Why would he do that? Could it be because the people who support him were becoming enriched? through the WHO. Is that possible? Watch President Trump make this announcement and break that down.
What is this? Withdrawing from the World Health Organization, sir?
Ooh, that's a big one. So we paid $500 million to World Health when I was here, and I terminated it. China with 1.4 billion people. We have 350. We have, nobody knows what we have because so many people came in illegally, but let's say we have 325. They had 1.4 billion. They were paying 39 million. We were paying 500 million. It seemed a little unfair to me. So that wasn't the reason, but I dropped out. They offered me to come back for 39 million. In theory, it should be less than that, but you know. And when Biden came back, they came back for 500 million. He knew that you could have come back for 39 million. They wanted us back so badly, so we'll see what happens.
Mr. President,
Pretty sad to think of it. China pays 39 million and we pay 500 million. And China's a bigger country.
Okay.
That's crazy.
I need to see that in writing. Did Joe Biden know that we could have been paying 39 million? I presume this is per year, and just said, no, we want to pay the premium. Why would he do that?
We want to enrich all these biopharmaceutical oligarchs.
Then we know that the Bill and Melinda Gates is a major founder of the WHO, and that they are allowed to then make rules that we know this, right? That supersede the sovereignty of any given state. Okay. He later says that the money, though, was not the reason. He says that wasn't the reason, but this is a reason. So we'll see what happens. I don't want to see what happens. I want this to be the end of this. Do not let them renegotiate. I think that's what most of us want. Here's how Whitney Webb pointed this out, though. She says we may not have seen the end of this because Trump also left the WHO in the mid-2020s, in mid-2020, and then just redirected what was once WHO funding to the Gates-funded Gavi Vaccine Alliance. While leaving the WHO is positive, it's not the slam dunk some are advertising, especially considering Gates' recent comments on Trump's enthusiasm for his vaccine innovation proposals. Can we all agree nobody wants Bill Gates to put any vaccines in place for the rest of us? Raise your hand if we agree to that. Who the F wants that? So yeah, Bill Gates, please go away. Kindly pound sand. She says she got called a lot of names for pointing this out back in the 2020s, but she brings the receipts as she normally does. So,
and we're trying to, Whitney just messaged me. Actually, she has a big piece coming out this week that we're going to try to get Whitney here on the show. That's something that, by the way, the legacy media would never do, is have Whitney Webb on their show.
No.
So yeah, anyway, I just messaged her right now. So hopefully she can join us this week, actually.
Okay, but I just want to point this out because we have covered these WHO drafts at length here on this show. And so even if that's the case, it may be, though, that Trump has withdrawn us from the U.S. From the WHO just in time, because remember these documents, this was from February 2023 pandemic treaty draft, and there was a provision in their own draft saying you cannot withdraw from the WHO. So had their pandemic treaty gone forward and this had been ratified, it said it would have taken 2 years to withdraw or 1 year from the date of your withdrawal. So even if this were the case, which it's not, but this was their own writing, he could say this and it would not take place until 2027. It also made, remember, WHO recommendations binding, whereas before anything that the WHO had recommended would just be a recommendation. No, they took out the word, this is their writing. They took out the words non-binding, meaning whatever they told you to do, you would have to do. So had he not withdrawn and this became law, then he could say, well, actually, we're not going to do it your way. We would have no choice for at least 2 years. Also, did it kick in only when there was a pandemic? No. Remember, it kicked in whenever they felt like they needed to prepare for a pandemic. That was their language. This underlying text means it's proposed, meaning they wanted the powers to prepare for a pandemic. We didn't even need one. Even they could work with a potential risk of a pandemic. Also, they had said that the fees that each country would pay in their own documents would be calculated based on their audits of each state's budget. So what the president said is that we were overpaying. It's because the WHO was allowed to look at our finances and say, I think this is what you'll pay. This is basically, it's kind of like how student loan payments are calculated. They look at what you've got, your income and your liabilities, and they say, you'll pay this. No, thank you. We don't need their audits to decide what we are going to pay based on what they think we can afford. That's oppressive. So who knew that this was negotiable? Apparently, President Trump did know, and he didn't like where those negotiations went, and they withdrew. So what will we miss out on, given that we now are not supposed to be a member state of the WHO? While the Independent Medical Alliance says we won't really miss much, and we've been over this. Their medical information is woefully political. Just look at their guidance on masks, and you'll know what I mean. We've been over this. Here's the IMA statement, the Independent Medical Alliance. They say the World Health Organization has little to do with world health and a whole lot to do with enriching its leaders with U.S. tax dollars and issuing pro-drug industry dictates with little grounding in fact. We've looked at this at length. If you need any more research about it, I can provide it to you. So now here is the next question. Since the majority of our viewers right now are watching us on YouTube, we still have to defer to the WHO in order to report to you anything. Here is currently today YouTube's medical misinformation guidelines that they have to be in line with either local health authorities or the World Health Organization. Given that the WHO often and on their website now still has some debunked science, we still have to go with that. So isn't it time that they remove this governing body from their guidelines, don't you think? And further, shouldn't other countries follow suit? So we've already seen protests in Japan, in Australia. Many other countries' citizens want to withdraw from the WHO. Are we leading the charge here? Do you think that others will follow suit? Let me know what you think of all of this.
Today's show is brought to you by Native Path Collagen. Now, finding an online
videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video.
So I thought the following video was very interesting. This was actually being released by a CERN employee in the United Kingdom. She come out. So I thought the following video was very interesting. This was actually being released by a CERN employee in the United Kingdom. She come out to specifically state that between the days of January 21st through the 25th, there's going to be a major celestial event, and that CERN is going to be offline. The machines that deal with particle matters and portal stuff is going to be offline. She wants it to be widely known that CERN is not going to be involved in any of the sightings that we are going to witness between the 21st and the 25th with this celestial event. To me, that's weird and it's a red flag. What is going to be happening? Take a look at what she has to say and tell me what you think.
This video is for the folks in the US, as you might not get to see this in a few days' time. My name is Clara, and I am a particle physicist working at CERN. And between the 21st and the 25th of January, there is going to be a beautiful display of the planets all lining up in the night sky. And I just really want to pass the message on that CERN, with the Large Hadron Collider that was used to discover the Higgs boson, we are off right now. We are not running. So anybody who might have gotten slightly over enthusiastic when the solar eclipse happened in North America, the Large Hadron Collider is not running. We are off. Nothing, anything that you think happens is nothing to do with us. Okay, thanks.
So the video you just saw comes from the paranormal chick on TikTok, and apparently something will be happening between the 21st and the 25th of January. And this something will involve planets lining up, causing this big spectacle in the skies. You also saw CERN's Taylor Swift, Particle Clara, say that Well, whatever you see, whatever happens will not involve CERN because look, our Large Hadron Collider will be down. My favorite part is when she says, she stutters, she looks to the side and says, we'll be off. Let me go ahead and replay that.
Slightly over enthusiastic when the solar eclipse happened in North America. The Large Hadron Collider is not running. We are off. Nothing, anything that you think happens is nothing to do with us. Okay, thanks.
Now, imagine asking her something as simple as, did you steal my cookies? And she goes, as she's looking to the side, well, what cookies? Has nothing to do with me. Clearly, you know about the cookies, and clearly you know about something that CERN is going to be involved with in these next few days. Particle Clara is either the ultimate troll or she's giving us the truth in plain sight like they usually do, because she responds back to the paranormal chick by saying, it was tongue-in-cheek because of all the videos that link the solar eclipse to CERN, despite us being in Europe and solar eclipses happening all the time. Also no quote-unquote portal stuff. There will be just pretty planets in the sky. Enjoy. Now look, Particle Clara says that the solar eclipse should not be linked in any fashion to CERN because CERN is located in Europe. I really don't think that's a good excuse given the fact that CERN and the Large Hadron Collider was definitely active on that day. They even came out and stated that during the solar eclipse, they were hunting and looking for dark matter. So the solar eclipse was linked to CERN in one way or another. Let us also not forget the man they named after the God particle, Peter Higgs, the Higgs boson particle, the God particle, just happened to pass away on the day of the solar eclipse. Yes, he was in his 90s. Yes, he's old. That's what old people do. But still, what are the odds? Let us also not forget that this was the very first time that we saw this black flying thing in the sky. Something that I've covered quite often on this channel that I said looks like a flying serpent or a flying snake flying at very high speeds, which was also very interesting because NASA had their own ritual going on because NASA was firing all 3 rockets under a program, a project called APEP or Apophis, which is also a giant snake deity in ancient Egypt. It is the serpent, it is the snake or the devil, which is also kind of funny because it's also the name of this giant asteroid, which is supposed to either hit or miss Earth on Friday the 13th, 2029. I definitely have more to say about this quote-unquote asteroid Apophis later on in this video because I don't believe they're telling us the whole truth about this quote-unquote asteroid. But when it comes to the April 8th solar eclipse, I don't care what anybody says. It'll always be my opinion that the April 8th solar eclipse was one giant ritual. Yeah, we didn't see destruction and chaos. We did see the black flying thing in the sky, if you want to count that. But we didn't see destruction and chaos like many people thought we would. But I still believe something went down that day. And the very next day, on April 9th, is when we started to see the blob over in Antarctica. I don't know what is going to be seen in the skies other than supposedly these planets lining up, to the point that we have CERN coming out and saying, well, if you see something, don't blame us. We're going to be offline. But people are still recording very strange sightings in the skies. This next video was captured by Fox Violet on TikTok. This was captured over in Orlando, Florida. Multiple people in the comment section of her video said they witnessed the same exact thing. This is not a planet. This is not a star. This actually descends behind a group of homes. This strange sighting was seen on a plane above California, and again, California has had many strange sightings ever since these fires. These are the things that people are saying they are just kites, but this video says different. Not only do we have to keep in mind the altitude, but watch how it turns to monitor the plane.
something. It turned around. Y se dio la vuelta. No se ve de forma de avión. Entonces como una sombra. Y ahorita se vio como que brilló, pero no. Y venía, pero
Again, talking about California, something very similar to this was seen inside the smoke clouds during the wildfires in Los Angeles. What exactly are these things? In this next video by the paranormal chick, which shows something very similar to this, but this time it's captured in Florida. People in the comment sections of this video are saying that this is just a kite, but again, these things have been seen in very high altitudes during very high winds, like the winds in the Los Angeles fires. They have been seen inside smoke clouds. So the thing is, even if this is just a kite, what's featured in this video, are these kites designed purposely to cause confusion? Are these octopus kites designed very similar to these things so people can easily dismiss what they're seeing and say that it's just a kite?
Right before the TikTok ban, a witness in Coral Springs, Florida, captured what I have deemed the octopus UFO in their sky. Now, keep in mind, he was right off the highway and literally pulled over to begin recording. This isn't a kite. This isn't somebody flying this, doing a practical joke. And now they're being seen over different states across the United States. But what is this? Is this a new type of UFO? And if it is, it's something that we've never seen before. It's completely different from jellyfish and the traditional UFO sightings. It almost makes you wonder if this is a new type of alien species or something else in our sky. Take a look at this and tell me what you think.
But the question is, where are these things coming from? And are they some kind of evolved form or a different form of these serpent-like creatures that have been seen in the skies, like I said, ever since the April 8th solar eclipse? But going back and talking about snakes, in a little over a week, we will be heading into the year of the snake on January 29th, 2025. This next disturbing video comes from Moon Henry on TikTok.
So let me get this straight. The government is summoning UAPs? We'll come right back to this. The news just dropped the first official piece of UFO evidence that you can clearly see, they say. This is the UFO egg that everyone's been talking about the last few days. I'm going to show you a clip in a minute where a guy says that they were summoning these UFOs, but...
Let's slow this down to take a closer look. That's an egg-shaped UAP suspended from a 150-foot long line. We're told the craft is about 20 feet long. The egg suspended in a cradle. And look how careful the pilot is as they bring their precious cargo into land. This is no blurry light in a distant sky. The source of the footage putting themselves at incredible risk to record.
Out of everything they have, they're going to give us this. And now we're about to see how they summon them. But it's really weird how they use that egg video when we have Stephen Greer saying that we have ETs basically in some form of slavery.
That object, or whatever was controlling that object, was also connecting to me through my mind.
And so, how did the object come to land?
I think it was invited to land by the psionics team.
Jake says his mission that night came from no accidental crash. The UAP was summoned by a separate team, a special team with special abilities.
There you heard it. They summoned it. What else do you summon? Demons, fallen angels, you know.
When it comes to this News Nation video clip, I can't help but think that there is something more here than meets the eye. There are people that are cracking jokes saying this is a hoax. There are people that are taking this more seriously. But again, there is just something else here. We're really hyping up this UAP disclosure, and if they were going to do something fake, one would think they would use AI to make it look more like a craft. But again, they give us this, something that does look similar to an egg. Even those on News Nation, those who were revealing this disclosure, were calling it the egg. And again, I have been saying that these things flying in the skies at very high speeds or slithering look very similar to snakes. And snakes do come from eggs. And what is Apophis? What is Apep? Apophis is the snake. It is the main demon snake. The individual in this video said that these things are summoned over here. It's all mental, which is very interesting because, again, Aleister Crowley, when he summoned over Lamb, Lamb told him to watch for the egg. Maybe Apophis is not a giant asteroid. Maybe it's an egg which holds a demon. And while that might sound funny, here's a couple of very interesting things about Apophis. The number for Apophis is 99942, as above, so below, 66642. The number 42 is very important in the Kabbalah. Matter of fact, I do believe the number 42 is the most important number in the Kabbalah. The number 42 is the number with which God created the universe according to the Kabbalah. So there you have it, 666 or 999. But again, we're going to the principles of as above, so below, and the number 42. But what's interesting is that months ago, I've made multiple videos where I said there is something off about this asteroid, and they are not telling us the whole truth about Apophis. There are even articles out there that even state how Apophis will be in the shape of an egg. Reading this article from WTSP, which is one of many articles talking about Apophis being in the shape of an egg, it says that it is also likely egg-shaped and taller than the Empire State Building. If Apophis did hit the Earth, it would cause widespread destruction up to a couple of hundred of miles from its impact site. And remember, Apophis is supposed to either hit or miss Earth on Friday the 13th, which is a date that's constantly pounded into our brains by big media, Hollywood, and so forth, as connected to bad luck, doom and gloom, and so forth.
Do y'all really want to see why they use the egg as disclosure for the aliens? Things are not as they appear. They're actually downright nefarious. Come with me. We'll come right back to this cosmic egg, the symbol of the bringing of all evil. So let me ask you this. What does every ancient and even modern culture all have in common? You know, it's not just in DC, right? It was in Egypt, it was in Babylon, it was in Rome. It's the missing member of Osiris. But how could I tell you about Osiris without telling you about Isis, who goes by many names? Isis, Inanna, Ishtar, the deity over the egg. Why we have Easter. Did you know that she's actually called the Queen of Heaven by these cults? The Bible talks about her quite a bit as well. So who is she? Get ready for a major plot twist. She is the wife, sister, and queen of Osiris. She was Osiris's sister, then they got married, being his wife, and then they had a child named him Horus. There's that egg again. Much like Osiris' missing member, you'll find that egg in every single culture. And what it means is there's a huge battle coming. At some point in this life, you'll get that everything is the exact same as it was. You know that when Aleister Crowley summoned the alien lamb, that he told him also about the egg? The spiritual visitor told him it's all in the egg. This egg is always depicted with the snake wrapping around it. The cosmic egg or the Orphic egg, like these supposed cosmic visitors. Stay with me. The ancient symbol of the Orphic mystery was the serpent-entwined egg, which signified the cosmos encircled by a fiery creative spirit. I wonder who that is. Horus is in the egg, Apollyon, Abaddon, Apollo, the Lightbringer, Satan, Lucifer. But not just him. The egg also represents the soul of the philosopher, the serpent, the mysteries. At the time of the ignition, it shall be broken, and a man emerges from the embryonic state of physical existence, wherein he'd remain through the fetal period. This egg is destined in all cultures and all mythology, and it represents all of evil breaking out of this egg. And when I say all of evil, I don't just mean spiritual, I mean physically. Something that those who hold the gates open would call a galactic battle. I'm talking about the last battle of Satan for the last time, with demons and fallen angels everywhere. Because it's now time for this egg to be opened. And that's why every indication we have leads to the same exact dates. 2027 is more than just a year. It's the year that fits every literal thing. We have the doom map, talking about 2025 and further. We have 1776 plus 250 years, perhaps maybe a little season. 2027, 2028. If we go with the old timeline, we have the 6,000th year or the 7th millennia starting in, you got it. Every single gauge of time that we have all points to the same exact time, which is why all of this is being introduced, why so many people are speaking on such grand levels, and why they say there's fleets heading to us. You, my friends, if you make it the next few years, get to see the grand climax of life ever. Pretty cool, right?
The asteroid Apophis is biblical wormwood. And if NASA's original date is correct, Friday the 13th, April 2029, when it's going to have its near miss. Oops, it didn't miss. Now what do we do? If that actually happens, and if it is wormwood from Revelation chapter 8, then that would be considered the middle of the Great Tribulation period, according to dispensationalist theology. So I was explaining that. Therefore, some people might take NASA's date for 2029 back up 3.5 years to try to find the beginning of that dreaded 7-year Great Tribulation period, which would land in the year 2025. Well, as I'm saying that, Derek's sitting over there. He's got an iPad. I don't even know what he's doing, but he has opened up a Hebrew calendar, and his eyes gets real big, and he briefly says this, that if you take the date, Friday the 13th, April 2029, back up 3.5 years earlier to the day, you land in the middle of the Feast of Tabernacles, which has been connected by many scholars, people like Donna Howell, to the second coming of Jesus Christ. We started finding one element after another, that 3.5 years earlier than the arrival of Apophis, there's the Feast of Tabernacles. We also note the Feast of Trumpets. We also note the Feast of Pentecost, all of which are connected 3.5 years before the arrival of Apophis, by Bible prophecy scholars, as connected to the second coming of Jesus Christ.
I don't know if this has anything to do with the return of Jesus, given the fact that nobody is supposed to know the time and date of Jesus' return, according to the Bible anyway, but I do find the timing to be pretty interesting. We have these things in the skies that do look like serpents. We have the UAP reveal, which looks like a big egg. We have Apophis that is supposed to hit or miss Earth, which also looks like an egg. And Apophis is named after the demon, the serpent. So it all seems to connect together. Talking about demons and fallen ones, I do find the topic of Astana, Kazakhstan to be very interesting. And this next video comes from the Trumpet Ezekiel on TikTok.
$50 billion is how much money we spent building a pyramid and a city on the other side of the planet. It's called Astana, Kazakhstan. And the pyramid that we built is in the middle of it, right in the heart of the city. It houses 200 delegates, and ironically, there are 200 fallen angels. But if you click inside that building, you can go to the boardroom, which has a round table where all 200 delegates get to meet. And if you disagree with them, there's a hole right there in the middle of the table, and you can see all the way down to the floor of reconciliation. And I guess that's the hole of peace. And that's next on the trumpet. The United States were some of the first people to even invest their money there. This is just one of many buildings they built. Circular 200-seat chamber for world religion meetings. Chapter 3 of the Book of Enoch, Fallen Angels, tells you all about the 200 angels that descended onto Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is where that happened. And if you go to the Book of Enoch, you can see that those 20 names that it mentioned right underneath that verse, they were leaders of tens. So there were 200 people that descended right here on top of Mount Hermon. And the United Nations decided this is right where we need to build a base, on the 33rd degree parallel. These people right here, and he will gather the nations. And no, I'm not talking about the Pope. Look at that logo right there. That's quite simply the 33rd degree. The logo shows the Earth divided by 8 sections, and each section is divided by 4 other sections. 8 times 4 is 32, and the center section makes the 33rd. There's a lot of people on that same page. Now you're going to start seeing that 33 show up everywhere, like in the buttons on his cloak. They represent the years of Jesus's life. The 33rd degree is where Jesus transfigured in front of the disciples. The 33rd degree is where the Masons built the Tower of Babel out of bricks. And yes, if you work with bricks or stones, you are considered a Mason. Charleston, South Carolina, home of the Masons. I love that these guys think that they are the oldest fraternity of men. You're not the oldest fraternity of men that swore an oath. That was the fallen angels. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. That book is in the Library of Congress. And this book is right on my shelf for all of us to read. And in the Sermon on the Mount, these are Jesus's words right here. Verse 33, in case you weren't paying attention. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. The men of old time are spoken of right here in Genesis chapter 6 under the wickedness of the world. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Jesus goes on in the book of Matthew and says, but I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. Swearing in on the Bible now has a whole new meaning for me. And when they take the oath of office, well, this ought to be great. These are all Jesus's words in red right there. Did we really pay $50 billion for a pyramid on the other side of the world? We sure did. But we also bought this big replica of the sun and like the Tower of Babel. That was that building right up there. And that big building of the sun, that's right there. We can go right inside of it. It looks like there's a steering wheel in it and all. You tap that little button right there. And I'll show you where you can drive it like with one hand. It's zoom over. Get to that steering wheel. Where are you taking this thing? I don't know. We got to look at the map. Road over there. There's a map of the world. Sets like a seal in clay. That's just like the book of Job right there. And we'll zoom out. You can look at it. It looks just like a clay seal. And it's like half flat, half round. That's next on the trumpet. We paid $50 billion for the city of Satan. I took you inside that pyramid just the other day. There's the sun that I just took you inside of. And those are the 2 pillars of Freemasonry right there. If you twist those letters around, wow, that place is real. No, really, if you back out of the sun and you go right down to the little place where I guess you could drive it to, you can go down to this big thing right here. It's like a museum or something. What does it say? Back out of that. It's like big as the earth, and then this thing going around it. We're just going to go right inside this thing. It's like some kind of crazy light show. $50 billion? Yes, it has the Tower of Babel. Fly this thing around. It is turned as clay to the seal, and it stands as a garment. Job chapter 38, 14. I think that's Florida. There's that verse in the book of Job right there. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. We may have paid $50 billion for a giant sun, but nobody knows what shape the earth is. God challenged Job to answer that question right here. Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid measures thereof, if thou knowest, or who hath stretched a line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? And a man would answer that question by pointing at those things right there when we don't even know how to build a blade of grass or what that stuff is in the middle of an acorn. But there are 3 crosses right there in the background. They really did spend $50 billion there. Jeremiah 33:3 says, "Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things, which thou knowest."
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're
Is this reminiscent of what you envision as Earth? Does this spring to mind? If I were to hazard a guess, you most likely do, since this is the model and structure we have been taught since childhood and continually shown today. Does universal agreement and popular consensus guarantee accuracy and truth? If I presented a strikingly different model that represents Earth and its true structure, would you dismiss it immediately, saying, seriously, how could 99.99% of the world be wrong? In fact, I would be taken aback if you did not respond with that general sentiment. This serves as a powerful testament to the persuasive influence of the all-seeing eye, that entity working from the shadows that has proven to be incredibly effective in propagating and bolstering the illusions and deceit of this well-crafted modern-day psyop. In my countless discussions and debates with a myriad of individuals, I have had to acknowledge the profound influence of the pervasive indoctrination that the world has fallen prey to over the accepted model of Earth, as well as so many other false realities we have succumbed to. My discourses have led to either losing new friends or greatly straining long-standing relationships because of this very topic of our home, Earth. I have discovered that this issue is incredibly polarizing, surpassing the most impassioned debates, even trumping the timeless contention over creation versus evolution. Through countless discourses, I have had ample opportunity to observe and reflect on people's initial reactions when confronted with these topics for the first time, even those who are already familiar with them. A discernible pattern emerges where a clear display of discomfort is visible. Many react defensively and show an immediate lack of interest in engaging or in being challenged with this topic. Meanwhile, others might offer a tentative, polite laugh, possibly questioning whether my assertions are actually genuine to begin with, or if I am simply one of those guys they have heard about. Individuals who actually believe in things as utterly absurd as an alternative model and structure of the Earth, having been intentionally concealed from us. It is considered by most to be so absurd and ridiculous that it is immediately dismissed as being entirely outside the realm of any possible truth. In essence, it's just too crazy to be true. This phenomenon exemplifies the self-protective nature of immense conspiracies. The more outlandish they are, the easier they might be to execute, as their sheer incredibility acts as a shield, guarding against scrutiny and obscuring any possible chance of truth. A quote from Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf: "In the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily, and thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie." We have now reached the most difficult topic of discussion in our exploration, which for many can certainly be a pill too big to swallow. Despite the unconventional and seemingly impossible nature of much of this content, which stands in stark contrast to our widely accepted beliefs, I remain dedicated to sharing the extensive information I have diligently collected over time and through exhaustive study. My aim is to help others navigate out of the deceptive maze that once misled me, and to challenge the array of false realities ingrained in all of us since childhood. Anticipating this, I would not share such seemingly impossible information unless I were entirely convinced of its truth, and compelled to guide people away from such a deception. I anticipate that only a select few will truly engage with these harsh revelations, and even fewer will proceed to investigate, validate, and share them with others, exposing the greatest of all deceptions in history. Recall previously our exploration of the geocentric model of Earth. This far more closely represents the true model of Earth than the widely accepted heliocentric model taught in modern times. To begin, let's examine the alternative image here, which depicts the Earth, Sun, and Moon. What immediate differences do you notice at first glance? The Earth is flat, and the Sun and Moon are small and local objects. Stay with me. The path we have traveled together thus far has been leading to a pivotal revelation, one that could not possibly have been the opening act of our journey. I have wrestled with the challenge of how to best approach the most formidable topic of all, one that demands reconsideration of deeply held beliefs to adopt an entirely new model of our home. This is the true model of our home, hidden from us in our contemporary era. Its discovery was so profound and startling that it spurred an intricate web of deceit. This deception was designed to misdirect our attention outwards towards a completely false cosmology of infinite space, diverting us from the groundbreaking discoveries made in Antarctica in the mid-20th century, which might later come to light. This discovery conclusively confirmed that we exist within an enclosed system, and revealed our world as a product of intelligent design, attesting to its creation by a higher power that has been with us since the beginning. For readers interested in examining and considering a flat Earth model, be aware that the Flat Earth Society is a controlled opposition group, resurrected in recent times, aimed at tarnishing the credibility of the Flat Earth movement. They have declared themselves as a leader in the Flat Earth Initiative, attracting newcomers to their website and media, only to present them with patently absurd claims, easily identifiable as flawed science. Their tactic is to hijack and misrepresent the fast-growing flat Earth progression, discouraging further inquiry by immediately making the entire concept seem ludicrous from the start. Leo Ferrari, a philosophy professor at St. Thomas University in New Brunswick, Canada, became known for his involvement with discrediting the flat Earth through his engagement with satire, and sought to discredit the flat Earth through parody rather than genuine scientific discourse. Ferrari was among the original founders of the satirical group the Flat Earth Society of Canada, which was created in the 1970s. The Society's approach was to use irony and humor to appear to earnestly critique the flat Earth, claiming to believe in a flat Earth, but would use absurd and comical assertions and examples to tarnish flat Earth reasoning. The same tactic has been employed again in modern times, with the aim of discrediting the recent resurgence of the fast-advancing Flat Earth movement worldwide. The resurgence of the Flat Earth Society reflects a calculated response to the steadily increasing number of genuine Flat Earth adherents, a community that is quickly gaining awareness and becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss as unfounded and unlikely. This movement aims to challenge the prevailing cosmological consensus and the accepted spherical Earth model, asserting these ideas to be erroneous and built on motive-driven lies. We will not be endorsing comical portrayals of flat Earth models often used to mock its supporters, such as the following, where the oceans of the world are portrayed as dripping off the side of an edge. Portrayals that are clearly nonsensical and inherently comedic can discourage those earnestly researching a flat Earth perspective by suggesting that a credible model is unattainable, primarily due to the inherent ridicule associated with these exaggerated caricatures. When exploring these bold assertions, you might turn to online platforms such as YouTube to confirm or challenge its claims. However, be aware that there are ongoing efforts to diminish and suppress content supporting many of the contentious claims discussed in our journey. YouTube has officially stated that it now uses advanced algorithms to suppress content labeled as conspiratorial. Whether you aim to corroborate these bold assertions or seek counter-arguments to discredit them, be aware of YouTube's stated approach. The platform has committed to suppressing videos deemed conspiratorial, while promoting content that aligns with the accepted narratives and official stories from organizations like NASA. This can directly influence your research by limiting access to certain viewpoints or oversaturating your search results with debunking videos. As you navigate through a vast array of online media to form your own understanding of the discussion presented here, it becomes clear that search platform strategies can serve as both an aid and a barrier, depending on your research goals. Those investigating further should prepare for the initial wave of debunking videos that will dominate search results. Those seeking videos that validate and reinforce our discussions will find it frustrating to navigate through multiple search result pages before encountering any supportive content. This skew in search results can lead to a phenomenon where headline experts, individuals who quickly form opinions based on initial information, might prematurely dismiss the issues discussed, influenced by the scarcity of supportive videos and the abundance of content alleging to reinforce the mainstream narrative. This may lead many to accept these surface-level findings as comprehensive research. Despite these challenges, I believe that dedicated and diligent students who have explored the breadth of subjects we have examined will persist in their quest for a well-rounded and comprehensive understanding of these topics. It is crucial to consider diverse perspectives and evaluate the arguments presented even in the face of significant obstacles like widespread censorship. While finding supportive content will be challenging, there is inherent value for truth seekers in exploring material that aligns with our discussions, as seeking further into such content will reveal deeper truths. The following is an official transcript of a discussion between Juniper Downs, a senior counsel for public policy at Google and YouTube, and Ted Deutsch, a Democratic member of Congress. This exchange focuses on YouTube's efforts to manage content related to conspiracy theories. Notably, the specific example cited for censorship in the following transcript is, as you might have guessed, Flat Earth. I need to know how you're dealing with all of these conspiracy theorists on your platform. So the first way is by demoting low-quality content and promoting more authoritative content, and the second is by providing more transparency for users. So we're introducing boxes that provide factual information at the top of results that have shown themselves to turn up a lot of information that is counterfactual, such as searching for "the earth is flat" on YouTube, where you see a lot of, so your response is to put a box in saying, "Nope, the earth is not flat." Correct. When searching for flat earth on today's most popular search engines, it is quite evident that the flat earth movement has gained attention. Prominent websites frequently respond defensively, indicating the movement's growing visibility. These efforts support the spherical Earth model, infinite space, and the legitimacy of NASA as a space exploration agency. Search results that provide resources supporting the flat Earth perspective, or those questioning the credibility of the world's space agencies, are far less visible or entirely suppressed. With that said, this will equip you with a much clearer understanding of what you will certainly encounter when investigating further into our discussions. Flat Earth stands as the single most censored topic to date on most search engine platforms and YouTube. On June 7, 2024, an example of censorship on YouTube was evident in the search results for Flat Earth. The first video supporting this viewpoint appeared only as the 91st result, with the second following as the 113th. This is a marked change from the period before YouTube implemented algorithms to suppress content deemed conspiratorial. Previously, searches for Flat Earth would return approximately 75% of results in favor of this theory, reflecting its dominance in related videos at that time. The suppression of content related to Flat Earth is extensive, even surpassing countless videos that expose NASA as the most elaborate and deceptive fraud in modern history. The sheer volume and compelling nature of the evidence supporting this claim indicate significant backing for the movement. Discoveries confirming a flat Earth within a contained world where outer space is merely an elaborate facade would have seismic impacts on worldwide populations. Such findings would compel us to discard established scientific theories, including the Big Bang, evolution, and our current understanding of cosmology, forcing us to adopt a radically new framework for understanding the fundamental aspects of our existence.
Kofi, follow me.